Chapter 170. Time passed slowly. Prince Yin stood in the stone room, motionless, waiting for daybreak. In front of him, the ghost girl was at a crucial stage of cultivation. Her spiritual consciousness was tightly shut, and she knew nothing about the outside world. Prince Yin was a calm person, and would not act rashly. That was why he decided to wait until daybreak. He knew very well that if Ningchen didn't show up by daybreak, he would never come back. Outside the underworld, the ghost palanquin streaked across the night sky, rushing back. There were too many things that needed to be done today, and it took a lot of time. He hoped that he could make it in time. The sky outside was getting darker and darker. This was the last darkness before daybreak, and also the darkest moment of the night. The ghost palanquin sped across the northern part of the Great Xia dynasty, leaving behind a flash of black light that could not be seen by the naked eye. Just as the ghost palanquin was about 10 miles away from the fog forest, the eastern sky quietly changed. Lightning appeared, and flames burned the sky, forming a terrifying apocalyptic scene. In the ghost palanquin, Ningchen's body was burning with flames. The bone-piercing pain attacked him again, as if he was being cut into pieces. After a while, the ghost palanquin rushed into the underworld. In the sky, the lightning dissipated, and the flames disappeared. Everything returned to normal. In the underworld, Ningchen activated the life scroll. Frost surged and quickly suppressed the flames around him. In a short moment, he experienced the transition of life and death again. Ningchen breathed heavily, his heart throbbing. Luckily, he managed to make it back in time. In the depths of the underworld, Prince Yin, who had waited until the last moment, released his hands from the sword rack. The next moment, the green and red swords flew out automatically, drawing two brilliant streaks of light. The green and red swords were threatening. The ghost girl was in great danger. At this moment, Prince Yin moved and blocked the green and red swords. With a wave of his hand, he put the swords back on the rack. At the entrance of the underworld, Prince Yin walked over and looked at Ningchen in the wheelchair. He did not ask anything and only said calmly, "You're injured. Don't run around." Seeing his senior, Ningchen felt much more relaxed. He took a deep breath and said, "I finished some things." Prince Yin nodded slightly and said, "Come with me to the academy tonight." Ningchen did not understand and asked, "Why are we going to the academy?" "You'll know when the time comes," Prince Yin answered. Ningchen nodded as if he understood, but didn't ask any further. "Come with me." Prince Yin turned around and walked forward. Ningchen followed and walked quietly behind him. The two of them walked into Ghost Lady's secluded meditation area. Ningchen pondered for a moment before he understood what was going on. Cold sweat dripped down his back. Fortunately, he had returned in time. Otherwise, even if the ghost girl had managed to keep her life, her cultivation would have been forcefully interrupted, and she would have gone mad. "You'll have to repay this favor," Prince Yin said calmly. Ningchen was stunned, and then he laughed bitterly. "Senior, the debt isn't settled like this. You can't push all the blame onto me. It's only right for me to repay Senior's debt," Prince Yin said calmly. Ningchen was speechless. Was there such a thing? The two of them walked out of the stone room. Prince Yin pulled out his Jiga sword and stabbed it into the ground in front of the stone room. Then he left with Ningchen. A single Jiga sword was more powerful than tens of thousands of restrictions. As long as one was not a Xiantian expert in the three disaster state, they would have to pay a price if they wanted to break through. Prince Yin was a reasonable man. He had destroyed all the restrictions within 10 li, so he returned her a Jiga sword. "When she comes out of seclusion, come and get the sword and return it to me," Prince Yin said. "Okay," Ningchen agreed. At this moment, Ningchen seemed to have thought of something. He asked, "Senior, there's a sword in the underworld. Do you want to take a look?" Prince Yin thought for a while and said, "Lead the way." Ningchen turned his wheelchair and walked in front, towards the main hall of the underworld. At the shore of the Rua Shui, there was a bottomless boat. The two of them crossed the Rua Shui and walked into the main hall. In the spacious and majestic main hall, a blood-red demon blade and a purple gold divine sword floated on a stone platform, exuding a powerful aura. Ningchen pursed his lips subconsciously. He would be lying if he said that he wasn't jealous. However, if it wasn't his, it wasn't his. There was no point in being jealous. Those who were content would be happy. It was fine if he was jealous of something like this. Prince Yan walked forward and reached out to touch the divine sword. Instantly, the blade and the sword hummed together, and a dazzling light rose rapidly, resisting the incoming attack. However, in front of absolute power, the blade and sword's resistance was useless. They could only let Prince Yan's hand pass through the layers of restrictions and touch the sword. The sword is not bad. Prince Yan retracted his hand and commented, "Can't we take it away?" Ningchen asked in surprise. "We can take it away, but it doesn't want to go with me," Prince Yan said calmly. Ningchen was helpless. Alright, pretend that he didn't ask anything. He forgot that the senior was someone who could understand the sword aura. He probably couldn't do this even if he practiced for another 100 years. After an hour, the two of them returned to the other side of the Ruoshui. When night fell, they left the underworld together and rushed towards the academy. In the academy, the headmaster was waiting outside the hut. He looked at Prince Yan walking in front of him and nodded. Prince Yan also looked at the old man in front of him. This was the first time he saw the headmaster in person. He was different from the previous incarnations. He couldn't feel any warrior's aura. Now it seemed that the headmaster was the most powerful person in the world. "Let's begin," the headmaster said. "Okay," Prince Yan replied. He opened his right hand, and a drop of blood flew out, floating in the void. Although it was only a drop, it seemed to have endless vitality. Ningchen still didn't understand what was going on. He sat in the wheelchair confused. The headmaster raised his finger. Suddenly the wind and clouds rolled. Vast and majestic noble spirit gathered from all directions and poured into the phoenix blood. It quickly dissolved the violent and fierce aura in it. At the same time, Prince Yan came to Ningchen's side. He pointed his sword and the congenital genuine qi poured into his body continuously, completely dissolving the poison of the netherworld flower. Ningchen's body decayed quickly. However, with the help of the poison of the netherworld flower, he regained feeling in his legs. A painful sound was heard. The poison of the netherworld flower quickly entered his spiritual sense and carried out the final transformation. At this moment, the headmaster guided the phoenix blood that had been purified by the noble spirit into the space between Ningchen's eyebrows to protect his spiritual sense. The poison of the netherworld flower that had entered his spiritual sense was quickly burned by the hot phoenix blood. It couldn't go any further. The headmaster and Prince Yan stopped and stood aside, waiting for Ningchen to wake up. His body can't be saved. We can only protect his spiritual sense first. Let's see if there's a chance when he reaches the congenital level, the headmaster said calmly. That's the only way. Prince Yan nodded. His internal organs had been completely burned. This was irreversible damage. In the world, there had never been any magic medicine that could regenerate the internal organs of mortals. Of course, it would be a different story if one reached the congenital level. The difference between mortals and celestial beings was much bigger than one could imagine. It was not only the difference in strength, but also in other aspects. The difference between congenital level and congenital level could only be understood by those who had reached the congenital level. The netherworld spring in his body is a disaster, not a blessing. It's better to take it out as soon as possible. The headmaster reminded them. The two juniors are fooling around. He should suffer a little. Prince Yan said. If he didn't have the netherworld body, taking the netherworld spring would do him no good. He believed that the ghost girl didn't do it on purpose. The two of them were just fooling around in desperation. In the world, all kinds of special bodies were unique. If they could be changed by a piece of the netherworld spring, then the special bodies would be worthless. 4 hours later, Ningchen woke up. He looked at the two people in front of him blankly. His head was dizzy, and he couldn't come back to his senses for a while. Headmaster, I'll take him to get something. I'll take my leave first. Prince Yan cupped his fists and bowed politely. Okay. The headmaster nodded and didn't stay. Prince Yan took Ningchen away. They didn't return to the underworld. Instead, they went to the two tombs. Now the two tombs had become forbidden areas in the southeast. No one dared to enter. Monsters were released from the yin and yang tombs. Even during the transition between life and death, they couldn't enter. Along the way, Ningchen finally understood his current situation. Simply put, with the protection of the phoenix blood, he didn't have to worry about becoming a living dead. However, there was basically no possibility of curing this body. Prince Yan didn't mention the netherworld spring. He was determined to let Ningchen suffer a little to teach him a lesson. The two of them came to the yin and yang tombs. Prince Yan glanced at the two tombs and said casually, "Pick one." Ningchen was speechless. Domineering. Senior said that the king medicine was useful to him, but one wasn't enough. After so many days, he didn't know which tomb was for life and which tomb was for death. However, it seemed that Senior didn't care. The yin tomb. Ningchen still chose the yin tomb. He felt that since the scroll of heaven was inside, there must be something even more incredible behind the two remaining doors. Prince Yan didn't say much. He walked to the entrance of the yin tomb, split the yin chi in the air with his sword, and walked in step by step. The yin tomb now looked completely different. Yin spirits were everywhere. Every few steps would trigger a large restriction. Yin chi filled the air. It was a land of death. Needless to say, he obviously chose the wrong place. Fortunately, he had come with Prince Yan. The green and red swords danced in the air like two dark rainbows. They cut through the mist and cleared the obstacles in front of them quickly. Neither the yin spirits nor the restrictions could stop them. Ningchen walked behind them with his sword on his back. He was stunned. Awesome. He didn't know how many times he had seen this scene, but he was still shocked to see it again. When he and Ghost Girl came, they suffered a lot because of the yin spirits. Not to mention, there were layers of restrictions and yin chi blocking them now. After a while, 4 headless horsemen appeared in front of them. However, their enemies were no longer Ning Chun and Ghost Girl, but the legends of the Xia Kingdom. The green and red swords flashed. Before the 4 headless horsemen could make a move, they were split in half by the 2 rainbows. They fell to the ground with a bang. Ning Chen's eyelids twitched. He was so shocked that he couldn't speak. In less than 15 minutes, the 2 of them arrived at the 2 unopened doors. Prince Yan glanced at the 2 doors in front of him. He grasped the green sword in his hand and slashed at one of the doors. With a loud bang, the door shattered. Amid the dust, a waterfall of mirror light flashed past, shining on the 2 of them. Chapter 171. The dazzling mirror light fell from the sky like a divine waterfall, illuminating the world. It was unstoppable. It came from the ancient past, crossing time and space. It was shocking. The green sword was illuminated by the mirror light, and its light dimmed. Almost at the same time, the red sword flew over. The green and red joined hands to block the mirror light. However, after a short pause, the 2 swords were sent flying and stabbed into the ground. Ningchen was shocked. He saw the mirror light coming, but it was too late to dodge. Just then, Yanqing Prince moved. His figure flashed, and he pulled out the abyss. The black sword light fell, creating a huge ravine that shook the world. The sword light and mirror light collided, causing the void to tremble. After a while, it could no longer withstand the terrifying power, and shattered with a bang. In the violent storm, the green robe and black hair danced in the wind. He was as immovable as a mountain. Ningchen came back to his senses, and subconsciously looked behind the door. In the huge stone room, there was only an ancient mirror floating on a stone platform. It was simple and majestic, extraordinary and extraordinary. Yanqing Prince walked in and broke the seal. He took the mirror and threw it over. "Give it to someone." Ningchen took the mirror and looked it over. He couldn't see anything special about it, so he put it away. He would study it in the future. A treasure valued by a sage at the 3 disasters realm must be extraordinary. However, he didn't need it. It would be good to give it to a man to protect her. The 6th door was broken. There was only one left. Yanqing Prince hesitated and didn't make a move. If he guessed correctly, the coffin of the tomb's owner was hidden behind the 7th door. However, it was at this moment that the 7th gate suddenly opened. In the blink of an eye, the entire great necropolis changed. Everything reversed, and the eternal world of darkness vanished. Stars twinkled in the sky, and boundless light poured down from the 9 heavens. A sigh came from the void. A blurry figure walked out. The world changed color. Tens of thousands of years couldn't hide his peerless beauty. One could feel that this was an invincible man. His body was tall and straight. His shoulder-length hair was as white as snow. The vicissitudes of life filled the air mercilessly. A hero in his twilight years was so clear. The aura of supremacy covered the entire starry sky. Rays of divine light fell from the sky and covered his body. The sage was in his twilight years, but he was still so brilliant that it made the world lose its color. It was hard to believe that this was the afterglow of his old age. The ancient realm suddenly moved, awakening from its slumber. Primal chaos surged, and circle after circle of ripples spread out. It flew out from Ning Chen's body and landed next to the man. It trembled as if it was weeping, expressing its endless longing. The man retracted his gaze and looked at the wailing ancient realm cultivator next to him. He sighed softly and reached out to touch the mirror, as if he were comforting an old friend. Strange scenes appeared in the void. Streak after streak of light began to condense. Under the setting sun, a woman was playing the zither. Her appearance was extremely beautiful, and her temperament was otherworldly. Only, her fine black hair was already dyed with snow, her time having passed. Wavering moon. The ancient sage's body trembled. He suddenly turned his head back from tens of thousands of years away. The entire great tomb rumbled, and the stars continuously exploded. The dome of heaven bloomed with the most beautiful fireworks. A pair of eyes that had experienced the vicissitudes of time looked over through the primal chaos. The man took a step forward, crossing tens of thousands of li of starry sky. The stars in the ancient tomb world began to wither. Streak after streak of light streaked across the sky. More and more light streaked across the sky, becoming denser and denser. In the end, it was as if it was raining, dazzling the eyes. The heavens descended. The ancient sage's terror exceeded the scope of the world's imagination. With a single step, the entire world seemed to be destroyed. Stars fell, heaven and earth trembled. It was a world-shocking scene. A terrifying sign. At this moment, the ancient sage seemed to be walking out of time and space. His blurry figure gradually revealed a corner of his clothes. The tattered black battle clothes emitted an unchanging coldness. Bloodstains were everywhere, a testament to the ancient sage's accomplishments in his life. The primal chaos gradually dissipated. A trace of white was exceptionally dazzling. This man who had once protected the common people, who was invincible in the heavens and earth, had truly aged. Even though his body was still tall and straight, it could not hide the whiteness of his hair. "You said that you would return." Under the setting sun, the woman was already very tired. Her eyes were dim, as if she would reach the end of her life at any moment. The sound of the zither was bleak. The tears of the woman dripped onto the zither. Her beauty had faded away, yet she was unwilling to leave. Wavering moon. Seeing this scene, the primal chaos around the ancient sage exploded. An indomitable figure walked out. The heavens and earth rumbled. Thousands of rays of auspicious light shot out. With a single step, he crossed the starry sky and arrived in front of the painting in an instant. The man's body was trembling. His face was filled with the vicissitudes of time. Although he didn't look old, he was no longer young. His hair was as white as snow. This was an indisputable fact. The sound of the zither lingered in the air. The woman's eyes dimmed as she stared into the distance. Gradually, she was filled with disappointment and despair. Her tears fell like rain, scattering her last hope. The person she had been waiting for would never return. Their fate had come to an end. 1,000 years of waiting had come to nothing. The setting sun was as red as blood, and the woman's face began to age. At the beginning, a gentle red light rose up and stopped the aging process. However, the woman's body began to disappear. Starlight scattered in all directions, and bit by bit, she disappeared from the world. At the end of reincarnation, did he ever think that in a distant place, there was still a woman waiting silently for him? Was it a question or was it reluctance? The final sound echoed through the great tomb. The ancient sage's expressions changed. Endless pain flashed through their eyes as they closed them. Their trembling hands tried to grab the painting, but the painting instantly shattered. The sound of the zither stopped. Time was merciless. Tens of thousands of years had passed. Everything vanished like smoke into thin air, unable to be retained. The ancient sage was so high and mighty. At this moment, he was no different from an ordinary man who had lost his true love. His tears quietly fell. Heaven and earth fell silent. Even the stars didn't dare to shine again. A soft sigh echoed in the void. The sage Gemini did not say anything. He reached out and touched the guqin in front of the woman. The sorrow in his eyes was so thick that it could not be dispersed. The next moment, the body of the sage of old gradually began to disappear. A cold wind blew, and a desolate scene appeared. The ancient realm fell from the sky. Everything returned to normal. It was as if it had never appeared. Ningchen took the ancient realm and sighed inside. What had just happened was just the ancient sage's afterimage, and the ancient realm's imprint. However, he had still felt a pressure that surpassed the heavens and earth. Even such an existence was powerless in the face of the death of a woman. Time was merciless. No one could resist it. He didn't know what had happened 10,000 years ago. However, there was no doubt that the ancient sage had returned too late. He hadn't even been able to see his woman for the last time. The seventh door was already open. Within the stone room, there were 2 coffins, but they were both empty. To the ancient sage, the most important thing was still that woman. He hadn't been able to accompany her for a long time when she was alive. But after she died, he had to accompany her for a long time. "Let's go," said Imperial Prince Yin calmly. "Yes." Ningchen nodded softly. The 2 of them left the Yin tomb and walked toward the Yang tomb. This time, Yin Qin didn't have Ningchen follow him. He entered the Yang tomb himself. Since the Yin tomb contained the coffins of the ancient sage, then the Yang tomb was just a fake tomb. No one knew what dangers lay inside. An hour later, dawn arrived on the eastern horizon. Seeing that the night was about to pass, Yin Qin walked out. He waved his hand and brought Ningchen with him. They flew north. Azure and red opened the path. The 2 of them were extremely fast. A dazzling ray of light appeared between heaven and earth. The moment the heavenly flame descended, another sword flew out from the sword rack. 3 swords appeared in the sky, blocking the heavenly flame. Light flashed through the fog forest. A moment later, the underworld gate opened, and the 2 of them disappeared. The 3 swords were like rainbows as they entered the sword rack. Yin Qin waved his hand and sent the 2 king medicines to Ningchen. "With the one you obtained before, you should be able to last for a while. You should use this time to cultivate. Try to reach the Xiantian realm as soon as possible," said Yin Qin. The power of the phoenix blood was constantly being consumed. The 3 king medicines were the best nourishment. As long as he could reach the Xiantian realm, there was still a chance. Ningchen nodded and entered seclusion with the 3 king medicines. He was only at the mid-9th rank, and was still very far from the Xiantian realm. He had to hurry. Yin Qin stayed in the underworld for 2 days before leaving. The rest of the road depended on Ningchen. He could only do so much. 3 days later, rumbling sounds came from the southeast. 2 large tombs slowly sank into the ground. The waves of fire and Yin Qi disappeared along with the tombs. Legends from 10,000 years ago would eventually fade away with time. Every era had its own legends. The past would never return. Before Ningchen entered seclusion, he had already explained everything to the Grand Xia. Success or failure depended on Xia Mingri's decision. The northern Ming army's sharpness grew sharper with each passing day. The 100,000 cavalry were invincible. Coupled with the 10,000 heavy cavalry's destructive power, the Grand Xia's defeat continued. The remaining 80,000 soldiers of the northern Ming army were basically there to clean up the mess and escort the provisions. As long as they didn't attack the city, they probably wouldn't be of any use for a long time. The 160,000 imperial guards chased from the front and back, desperately trying to stop the northern Ming army's advance. However, there were several times when the northern Ming cavalry broke through before they could form an encirclement. The strength of the imperial guards of the Grand Xia was well known. The northern Ming was also trying their best to avoid a direct confrontation. After all, this was the territory of the Grand Xia. For the northern Ming without any reinforcements, the gains didn't make up for the losses. In the northern Ming camp, Fan Lingyue sat in her tent, frowning as she looked at the battle reports that had been sent over. The imperial guards of the Grand Xia were getting fewer and fewer. It seemed that the northern Ming army had shaken them off. However, she felt that things weren't so simple. "Men," said Fan Lingyue. "Present." A general walked in and respectfully waited for orders. "How far are we from the army behind us?" asked Fan Lingyue. 120 miles, replied the general. "Why are we so far?" Fan Lingyue frowned. 2 days ago, the imperial guards of the Great Xia were really tight. The soldiers have been marching, and the troops behind us couldn't keep up, said the general nervously. "Useless." Fan Lingyue slammed the table and raged. "You didn't even report such an important matter. What's the use of having you?" The general was so frightened that he shivered. He immediately knelt down and kowtowed, begging for mercy. "Spare me." Chapter 172. The general was dragged out and given 20 beatings. Fan Lingyue walked in front of the map and looked at the location of the army, deep in thought. A few days ago, the Great Xia guards had been intercepting them, but their reaction was getting slower and slower. If this was a deceptive tactic, the goal was worth thinking about. She was confident that if they fought on the plains, the Beiming cavalry would not fear anyone. Great Xia's Jingwu Duke would also not choose to fight on the plains. The Great Xia guards were tight at the front and loose at the back. They were obviously trying to increase the distance between the Beiming army and them. As for their goal, it would be to split them up and destroy them or burn their rations. 120 miles was not enough for the Beiming cavalry to be left in the dust. There was not enough time, and the possibility of a battle was not high. Hence, their goal was obvious. Thinking about this, Fan Lingyue said, "Qing Wuyo." "Present." Qing Wuyo walked into the tent and said respectfully, "Immediately bring 7,000 light cavalry over. Great Xia might be eyeing their rations." Fan Lingyue instructed with a serious expression. "Yes." Qing Wuyo accepted the order and left the tent. After Qing Wuyo left, Fan Lingyue stared at the map in front and continued to think. Beiming's rations could be considered sufficient. The central plains were rich, and the few cities that they had taken down all had large amounts of storage. Furthermore, their rations were sent in batches and were heavily guarded. Even if Great Xia wanted to take their rations, it would not be so simple. Actually, no matter the time, rations were the key to war. Great Xia's actions were not strange. However, Great Xia's Jingwu Duke was a person who used troops more than he was strange. Such a strategy was not his style. Fan Lingyue thought of a person, a lifelong rival. They were the people who knew each other the best in the world. Unfortunately, they were destined to be rivals. Fan Lingyue walked out of the tent and stood quietly in front of it. Looking at the scenery of Great Xia, her eyes were filled with determination. In a few more months, this prosperous land would no longer belong to Great Xia alone. When the Beiming soldiers saw the beautiful figure in front of the tent, no one dared to disturb her. The night slowly passed, and when the sun shone down, a soldier rushed over on a horse. After dismounting, he quickly knelt down and said anxiously, "Reporting to the advisor, the Great Xia army ambushed our rations, and 20% of our rations were destroyed. General Qing sent me to deliver the news." "Understood, you can leave," Fan Lingyue said indifferently. "Yes." The soldier withdrew and hurriedly left. Fan Lingyue's expression was the same as before, without any change. Since he had already expected this, there was nothing to be surprised about. As the saying goes, before the three armies move, the provisions must move first. Destroying the enemy's supply lines, or supply teams, was indeed a good method. This time, Beiming's army was different from before. The grain was sent in batches to prevent Great Xia from doing that. 20% of grain was not much, and it was worth it to prove Great Xia's goal. When the army was about to break camp, Qing Wuyo rushed back and reported the situation in detail. After listening, Fan Lingyue asked, "How long until the wheat grains in the north are harvested?" "In the next 3 to 5 days," Qing Wuyo replied. Fan Lingyue nodded. His eyes narrowed slightly as he said softly, "In the next few days, we have to step up our defenses. Great Xia will still have designs on our rations." "Why?" Qing Wuyo asked in confusion. Their wariness of the grain would only get tighter and tighter. Even if Great Xia succeeded in their sneak attack, they would have to pay a huge price, so there was no need for that. They're forcing us to change our path, Fan Lingyue said calmly. Qing Wuyo did not understand, and Fan Lingyue did not explain further. She just followed the orders. She could basically confirm that the person behind this plan was Ning Chun. The plan at the start was really good, using a series of attacks to disrupt Beiming's formation, and then waiting for a chance to sneak attack their grain. The first sneak attack was something she did not notice in time, and it was also the only weakness of Beiming. Unfortunately, Great Xia was not good enough at the last step, and they only destroyed 20% of their grain. Beiming's grain was much more abundant than what Great Xia had expected. Losing 20% was not much. It was a very unfortunate step. If Beiming did not have enough grain, this loss of grain might have forced her to change her path. The wheat grains in the north were ripe, and it was time to harvest. If she wanted to gather grain, there were only two paths she could choose. Due to the limited land in the southwest, the wheat grains were scattered, and it was too troublesome for the army to gather them. As for the wheat grains in the south and southeast, they were densely planted, and it was easy to gather the grain they wanted. Great Xia only needed to block one of the two paths, and the remaining path was not up to her to choose. The real problem was where Beiming would go after harvesting the grain. Great Xia would definitely block the south, forcing them to go down the southwest path. Now it did not seem like much. However, the southwest direction they were going was actually the northwest of Great Xia. The further south one went on the northwest path, the more mountains and hills there were. No matter the time, this was a terrain that cavalry did not want to encounter. The idea was not bad, and she looked very far ahead. However, there were always changes in the plan. Ning Chun was not in the army, and he could not do anything about these changes. There was never a perfect plan in the world, and any ingenious plan needed to be adjusted at the right time. Great Xia's Duke Jingwu was a genius at arranging troops, but in terms of scheming, he was still lacking. Now that Great Xia had made their move, it was time for her to respond. In the Great Xia Guard's barracks, Duke Jingwu sat in his tent. Below him, the 6 generals sat on both sides, discussing future war matters. Now the 160,000 guards had split into 2 groups to block the Beiming army. On the other side, the blood-clad Marquis had taken a detour to the south to block the Beiming army. Hearing the opinions of the generals, Duke Jingwu's brows were locked tight. Their current position was on the plains, and facing the Beiming cavalry was not a wise decision. Although the Great Xia Guard's Legion Corps were the elites of the elites, facing the Beiming cavalry on the plains, their chances of winning were slim. Beiming did not have any reinforcements, so they were not willing to fight head-on. On the other hand, Great Xia had lost too many times and could not afford to lose again. In the current situation, Beiming still had the advantage. The only force that Great Xia had that could go head-to-head with Beiming was the 160,000 guards. However, they could not grasp the route of the Beiming army, and their blocking was too passive. Jiming Marquis had provided a good idea. However, it was very difficult to execute. Although they had gained a lot from this first sneak attack, they had also lost a lot. The Beiming army reacted quickly, and with the help of the cavalry, they were much harder to deal with than expected. The first sneak attack could not be said to be a success or a failure. It could only be said that the result was not ideal. Duke, should we continue to send troops to block the Beiming grain transport team? Asked a green-armored general. Continue, but be careful. Beiming should have set up an ambush, reminded Duke Jingwu. I understand. The green-armored general cupped his fists. In the southern border of the Grand Xia, a beautiful girl was walking on the streets, asking for directions. Uncle, how do I get to Taiyue City? The girl was very likable, and her attitude was also not bad. The old man who was asking for directions enthusiastically pointed at her. He then asked, Miss, are you from the Grand Xia? Uncle, how did you know? Asked a man curiously. Haha, your attire is very unfamiliar. It doesn't seem like the customs of the Grand Xia, laughed the old man. Oh, a man looked at her attire. She had not paid much attention to it. Is this your first time in the southern border? Asked the old man. No, I've been here before. A man shook her head. The old man smiled and advised, "Miss, since you've come to the southern border, you should change your attire. That will save you a lot of trouble." A man nodded thoughtfully. However, she hadn't run into any trouble. A man didn't know that any trouble she had run into had been taken care of by the people following her in secret. Otherwise, what kind of beautiful girl would be able to walk the streets safely for so many days? When she had no money, she would even randomly pick up silver. Picking it up once was luck. Picking it up twice was luck. Picking it up 3 times should be a bit suspicious. Half a day later, a man had changed out of her imperial attire. She had even taken off the bits and pieces of accessories on her head. Wearing a simple green dress, she once again began to walk and ask for directions. "Aunt, how do I get to Taiwa City?" "What a beautiful girl." The old woman smiled. "Thank you for your praise. How do I get to Taiwa City?" A man continued to ask, "Miss, why did you come out alone? Where's your family?" The old woman held a man's hand as she asked, "I came out to find someone. I snuck out. How do I get to Taiwa City?" A man persistently asked. Come. Miss, my house is just next door. Come over and have a seat. It won't be too late to hurry on your way after drinking some tea." The old woman was delighted and enthusiastically pulled a man into an alley. A man felt a bit thirsty and obediently followed along. She didn't know that some alleys were called brothel alleys and brothel alleys, and some aunts were called brothel keepers. The bodyguard following them in secret felt a headache coming on. Did this little princess not feel that something was wrong? That old woman's makeup was so bad that even her own mother wouldn't be able to recognize her. With a single glance, one could tell that she wasn't from a good family. Unfortunately, a man didn't feel anything. That was because she had never seen any brothel alleys or brothel alleys. She also didn't know what a brothel keeper was. In the past, with the protection of the barbarian king, she rarely even left the barbarian palace. She didn't know anything about the outside world. Later, she secretly ran out with Ning Chun and came into contact with quite a few things. However, those were things that Ning Chun wanted her to see. "Come, miss, have some tea." The old woman poured a cup of tea and handed it over. Her smile was like a flower that had grown out of a bad flower. "Thank you, auntie." A man received the tea and politely said, "Is the person you're looking for in Taiwa City?" The old woman sat down and poured herself a cup of tea. She took a sip and asked, "I don't know." A man shook her head. "Then what's the person you're looking for? What does he do?" The old woman beat around the bush. "He's called Ning Chun." A man replied. After saying that, she thought for a moment and continued with uncertainty, "I think he's Grand Xia's Jiming Marquis." Pft! Hearing this name, the old woman spat out the tea she hadn't swallowed. Chapter 173. Cough cough. The old woman choked on her tea and violently coughed for a long time. In the Grand Xia, the 3 words knowing fate Marquis were definitely not a good symbol. Miss really likes to joke. The old woman naturally didn't believe her. She rubbed her chest and forced a smile. "I'm not joking," seriously said Aman. The old woman didn't want to talk about this topic anymore. Many people in the Grand Xia knew that the knowing fate Marquis had died to the wrath of the heavens. In truth, Aman also didn't know much about Ning Chun. Ever since she had returned to the barbarian palace, the barbarian king had rarely mentioned Ning Chun in front of Aman. When he couldn't hide it, he would just briefly mention it. "Miss, wait a moment. I'll go get some fruit for you to eat on the way," said the old woman kindly. "Thank you, auntie." Aman smiled. The old woman quickly walked to the back of the hall. There were already several people waiting in the courtyard. "What's going on?" asked an old man. "A young chick has come. He doesn't seem to be a local. Based on his accent, he should be from the southern barbarian lands. This is business that has been delivered to your door. Do you want to take it or not?" "Yes." The old man nodded without the slightest hesitation. He waved his hand at the 3 people behind him, and then quietly walked to the front of the hall. "For the Grand Xia to have such unruly people like you, it's no wonder my king is worried about the princess." The sudden appearance of a figure came without any warning. The 5 of them didn't even have time to react before a saber light flashed, and their heads flew 3 meters into the air. Their bodies collapsed, dyeing the ground red. Aman waited for almost an hour in the front hall, But the old woman still hadn't returned. She curiously walked to the back hall and shouted, "Auntie, I'm leaving." The empty courtyard didn't receive a reply for a long time. Seeing no one return, Aman could only turn and leave. Her beautiful eyes were still filled with confusion. After Aman left, the 5 corpses and a large amount of silver from the back hall were thrown into the courtyard. The silver was dyed with blood and was extremely dazzling. 2 days later, Aman was on her way to Taiwa City when a young figure slowly walked over. His green robes were simple yet noble. His handsome and calm face made him look even more extraordinary. There was a simple and unadorned sword rack on his back, which contained 4 different swords. The person walked step by step, neither fast nor slow, not even a speck of mud staining his body. A man's eyes lit up, and a brilliant smile appeared on her pretty face. She jogged over and hugged the person's arm, happily saying, "Senior, what a coincidence." A faint smile appeared on Prince Yan's calm face as he said, "What a coincidence. Where are you going?" A man smiled, "To the west. I happened to meet you." Prince Yan turned around and changed his direction. He answered as he walked, "Oh." A man hurriedly followed and continued to hold the former's arm. She asked, "I'm going to look for Ningchen. Do you know where he is?" "He's in seclusion. You can't see him now," Prince Yan said softly. "Then when will he come out?" Wild asked curiously. "Very soon," Prince Yan said. "Then he's come out of seclusion. Can you take me to see him?" A man said happily, "Sure." Prince Yan stopped and put down the sword rack. He said calmly, "But you have to carry it." A man tried to lift it but couldn't. She suddenly felt troubled. "It's too heavy. I can't carry it," a man said softly. Prince Yan waved his hand, and the sand sword flew out. It scattered and wrapped around his sleeve. He said, "Try it now." A man tried again, and finally managed to lift it. She was in a good mood and smiled brightly. Prince Yan's lips curled up slightly. He turned around and continued on his way. Let a man pay for the half a year that Ningchen owed her. The 2 of them walked very slowly, because a man had to stop and rest for a while. Prince Yan was not in a hurry. When a man stopped, he stopped and waited for the little girl to rest. The guard following in the dark did not dare to act rashly. He knew that this person was Prince Yan of Great Xia. He was one of the few people who knew about the battle at the barbarian palace last time. While the 2 of them were resting, the guard sent out a letter. 2 days later, he finally received a reply. There were only 5 words on the secret order. "You don't have to follow me anymore. Return." This was a letter personally written by the barbarian king. It was simple and clear, summoning the guard back to the palace. After receiving the secret order, the guard left on the same day and returned to the barbarian palace. A man knew nothing about this. Prince Yan saw it very clearly but didn't say anything. "A man, do you want to learn the sword? I can teach you," said Prince Yan slowly as he walked in front. "I don't want to." A man shook her head. "Huh." Prince Yan smiled faintly and didn't try to persuade her. There were very few people in this world with a pure heart. Only a pure heart could sense the aura of the sword. So to him, a man was the only one who could inherit his martial path. However, Ningchen had also said that a man wasn't interested in the martial path. He couldn't force her. "You can teach Ningchen. He's smarter than me." A man learned to put in a good word for a certain person. "He can't learn it," said Prince Yan honestly. A smart person didn't mean they were suited for cultivation. Ningchen had too many things on his mind. It was almost impossible for him to sense the aura of the sword. A man thought about it, and still didn't want to learn it. Furthermore, if Ningchen couldn't learn it, she definitely couldn't. The 2 of them walked for a while before a man suddenly thought of something. "Senior, why are we going to the west?" "To fight," said Prince Yan. "Fighting isn't good," said a man seriously. Prince Yan smiled. "He's a bad person." "Oh," said a man, agreeing with this explanation. The journey from Nanjiang to the west of the Grand Xia was very long. Prince Yan had a burden behind him, so he didn't know when they would arrive. Half a month later, the 2 of them finally left Nanjiang. After a man got used to the weight of the sword rack, she walked much faster. No matter what, this little girl still had some foundation in the martial path. It was true that a man didn't like to cultivate. After 10 years, the speed at which she reached the 4th rank was so slow that it made one's hair stand on end. However, considering a man's attitude of wanting to fish for 10 days, being able to reach the 4th rank was also a strange thing. On the other side, the war between Northern Meng and the Grand Xia changed again. Duke Jingwu sent troops to attack Northern Meng's grain transport team. After a few times, he finally succeeded once and destroyed a large amount of Northern Meng's grain. The process was very tragic. Both Northern Meng and the Grand Xia paid a huge price. Northern Meng set up many ambushes, but the Grand Xia wouldn't fall for it so easily. After a few exchanges, they finally grasped the weakness of Northern Meng's uneven division of troops. They used the Imperial Army as bait to attract Northern Meng's attention. Afterward, the 5,000 elite cavalry of the Divine Wind Battalion took the chance and destroyed Northern Meng's heavily guarded grain camp. The Divine Wind Battalion moved quickly. They came quickly and retreated quickly. When Northern Meng reacted, the grain camp was already on fire. The Divine Wind Battalion was the most elite Imperial Army camp in the Grand Xia. These 5,000 elite cavalry were strong enough to fight against 10. The ambush set by Northern Meng couldn't be stopped, and they suffered heavy casualties. However, just when everyone in the Grand Xia commander's tent thought that Northern Meng would gather grain along the southeast, or the south due to the lack of grain, Fan Lingyue suddenly changed the route of the army in advance. They quickly went south along the southwest direction, causing the Marquis of the Bloody Garb to miss. No one knew what was going on except for the military advisor of Northern Meng. This was because that batch of grain was given to the Grand Xia by her. The grain was real, and the soldiers who died in battle couldn't be faked. The only illusion was the amount of grain. A lie was always 70% true and 30% false, making it difficult to distinguish. War was the same. Since she saw through the Grand Xia's plan, how could she not give them a surprise? This sudden change of route completely messed up the deployment of the Grand Xia, and also allowed Northern Meng to take the opportunity to break away from the encirclement of the Imperial Army. Northern Meng's path to the south to attack the Grand Xia was one step closer. In the netherworld, Ning Chun, who had been in seclusion, opened his eyes. The power of a 10,000-year-old king medicine was beyond imagination. The drop of phoenix blood in his spiritual sense had absorbed most of the medicine's power. However, the remaining power still helped him to advance from the middle of the 9th level to the late stage, one step closer to the peak of the 9th level. There were still 2 king medicines left. Originally, he needed to wait for a period of time before consuming them. However, Ning Chun was worried and didn't want to stay here for long. Thus, he swallowed the 2 king medicines in one go. The unusually large medicinal power surged wildly like a raging sea, difficult to control. Ning Chun relied on his immortal body and ignored it, allowing the medicinal power to surge wildly. Soon after, he completely opened up his Dantian sea of qi and frantically absorbed the wild power in his body. In half a month's time, Ning Chun's cultivation soared to the peak of the 9th level. During this time, Ning Chun attempted to use the surging medicinal power to break through to the Xiantian realm. The result was undoubtedly a failure. If the Xiantian realm was so easy to reach, there wouldn't be so few Xiantians in the world. Of course, the 2 king medicines weren't completely useless. At the very least, they temporarily repaired his body that had been corroded by the Yellow Springs flower, and allowed him to take off the black cloth. Unfortunately, even the power of the king medicines couldn't repair the completely damaged internal organs. Without reaching the Xiantian realm, the damage to the internal organs was irreversible. The peak of the 9th level was only one step away from the Xiantian realm. However, in reality, it was a whole layer of heaven. After practicing for another 2 days, Ning Chun repeatedly encountered the Xiantian realm barrier. It was difficult for him to move forward. He stood in the world, but he couldn't cross it. The king medicine's power was decreasing, which meant that the days he could practice were decreasing. Ning Chun had no choice but to temporarily give up on breaking through to the Xiantian realm and focus on practicing the Taoist secret method that Dao Kuei gave him. Senior Jiang once said that this secret method was the most suitable method in the world for practicing the life scroll. If he wanted to improve his strength, this was the fastest way. Ning Chen operated the life scroll. Suddenly, the surrounding temperature dropped rapidly. Frost appeared and floated down from the sky like snowflakes. The secret method was divided into 2 parts, created for people with 2 different constitutions. His constitution was cold, so he could only practice half of it. The name of this half was very special. It was called the art of clear snow. It was perfected by generations of Taoist sages, after tens of thousands of years. They wanted to compete with the heavenly tomes. Among the heavenly tomes, other than the life scroll, all had their own unique mental cultivation methods and moves. Only the life scroll was an exception. Therefore, the Taoist sages created this secret method to make up for the shortcomings of the life scroll. The art of clear snow was the first method under the heavenly tomes. To a certain extent, the 4 words in the middle could be removed. Chapter 174. Ning Chen's cultivation lasted for another half a month. The art of clear skies before snow was complicated and difficult to cultivate. It was comparable to the heavenly writing. During this half a month, the situation in Great Xia became even more serious. After breaking free from the encirclement, the Beiming army continued down south, and it was hard to stop them. The soldiers that Great Xia hurriedly moved over from various places were too weak compared to the Beiming Iron Cavalry. The Great Xia cavalry 300 miles east of the imperial city was still practicing the tactics that Ning Chen left behind. Xia Zi watched day and night, waiting for the moment to succeed. In the west of Great Xia, Prince Yan and Ah Man were heading west. They were not far from their destination. In the west, Marquis' triumphant return, and the Blackwater army tried their best to stop the Eternal Night cult's invasion. With the help of the surrounding cities, they barely managed to maintain the stalemate. In the southeast, Minyang country invaded. Marquis loyal and brave fought a tough battle. 150,000 Great Xia border soldiers fought a bloody battle to protect the southeast of Great Xia from being invaded. Now the most urgent battlefield was in the north. Fan Lingyue's army was advancing deeper and deeper. Great Xia could not stop them. 100,000 cavalry showed their abilities, shocking the world. This was the first time in history that more than 100,000 cavalry had appeared. This was a true flood of molten iron. Nothing could stop them. Fan Lingyue's management of the army was strict. The fighting quality of the army was abnormally strong. 7 years of training was all for this war. 300,000 troops entered and left Great Xia. Excluding the 50,000 left at Heaven's Gate, there were less than 200,000 left. However, compared to Great Xia's losses, these sacrifices were less than 1/10. In the first half of the war, because of Emperor Xia's arrogance and stupidity, Great Xia missed many opportunities and suffered defeat after defeat. In the middle half of the war, Great Xia had many internal problems, causing a great loss of national strength. Now the war between the 2 dynasties had entered the second half. The survival of Great Xia depended on this final game. The negotiations between Great Xia and the barbarian dynasty had a breakthrough. The barbarian king demanded an exorbitant price. Prince Hua agreed to most of the conditions, but he did not relent on the matter of ceding land. The negotiation period was only 14 days. Great Xia's attitude was clear. They would fight for it with all their might, but it was not necessary to succeed. In fact, the barbarian king had some doubts when he saw Prince Hua. He thought of the marriage between Great Xia and True Extreme Nation. It was a fact that True Extreme Country and Great Xia were not on good terms. However, there was no true friendship between countries. There were only interests. Moreover, it was not the first time that the barbarian dynasty and Great Xia had fought. In the past, Great Xia had sent Marquis Jiyu to guard Nanjiang with the purpose of preventing the barbarian dynasty from invading. Since the barbarian dynasty could borrow troops, the True Extreme Nation could do the same. Furthermore, Great Xia and True Extreme Country had a layer of relationship. As long as they did not fall out with each other, this layer of relationship was a good excuse for a trade. In the end, Prince Hua threw out another huge temptation. As long as the barbarian dynasty was willing to lend troops, Great Xia was willing to sell 20% of Bairuyuan's iron, or for the next 10 years to the barbarian dynasty at the original price. At this moment, even the barbarian king could not help but be moved. Bairuyuan was the largest source of iron, or for Great Xia, and its mineral reserves were shockingly rich. What the barbarian dynasty lacked the most was iron. With these iron ores, the weapons and armor of the barbarian dynasty would be completely new. With this condition, the following negotiations were abnormally smooth. The barbarian king and Prince Hua were both old foxes who had lived for decades. They knew when to advance and when to retreat. In just a few days, the remaining conditions were agreed upon. Not long after Prince Hua returned to the court, the barbarian king ordered the deployment of troops. 100,000 barbarian soldiers majestically embarked on the journey to the north, adding another variable to this war. After receiving this news, Fan Lingyue calculated the impact of the barbarian dynasty's participation in the war. The northern battlefield between the barbarian dynasty and Great Xia was very far away. It would take at least 2 months to arrive. By that time, it would already be autumn, and the situation between the two dynasties would be more or less settled. In the west of Great Xia, Prince Yan and his little burden, who had been traveling for more than a month, finally arrived at their destination. When Prince Yan and Marquis met, they smiled faintly. Prince Yan was the legend of Great Xia, and Marquis was the invincible military god of Great Xia. Long time no see, Marquis Kaishian said. Long time no see, Prince Yan replied. Are you here to look for a sword? Marquis Kaishian asked. No. Prince Yan shook his head and said calmly. A junior saw that I was too bored and found something to do. Marquis Jiming? Marquis Kaishian asked. Among the younger generation of Great Xia, only the legendary Marquis Jiming could invite the person in front of him. Ha! Prince Yan chuckled, tacitly admitting it. When? Marquis Kaishian asked calmly. Since he wasn't here to look for a sword, his purpose was obvious. There was no need to ask further. Tomorrow, Prince Yan replied. Marquis Kaishian nodded and arranged for tents for the two. On the other side, he sent a soldier to deliver a letter to the martial monarch. In tomorrow's battle, they might be able to see if the martial monarch of Eternal Night cult was truly invincible. As night fell, Prince Yan stood in front of the moon. His green robe fluttered in the wind. His body gradually merged with the world, as if he would break through the sky at any moment. The current legend of Great Xia was a true genius of the generation. He had practiced martial arts for 27 years, crossed the Khanate realm, and transcended 5 tribulations. If there was one person in the world who could fight a 5th tribulation realm cultivator against a 3 calamity realm cultivator, it would be Prince Yan of Great Xia. In the army, the patrolling soldiers looked at the distant figure in the night. No one dared to disturb him. Of course, there was one exception. Senior. A man ran over, instantly breaking this transcendent atmosphere. What's wrong? Prince Yan asked with a smile. Here's a peach for you, said a man happily, as she handed over one of the 2 big peaches. Where did you pick it? Prince Yan asked softly. The peach was very fresh. It was obvious that it had just been picked. It was impossible for the army to have it. There, said a man with a smile as she pointed to the southeast. Prince Yan smiled and didn't say anything. This girl really knew how to run. Senior, you have to win tomorrow. Good luck. A man clenched her fists and encouraged him. Okay, said Prince Yan softly. I'm going to sleep. After eating the peach, a man clapped her hands and said goodbye with a smile. She then jogged back to her tent. The peaceful night quickly passed. When the sun rose the next day, the heavy cavalry of Eternal Night Cult and Great Xia's Blackwater army were both on alert. They faced each other 10 kilometers away, nervously waiting for the battle to begin. The martial monarch appeared. He was wearing black armor, and the Tianhuang halberd was ferocious. At that moment, the sound of footsteps could be heard from the distance. A young figure walked over in the light of dawn. His steps were neither fast nor slow. Each step was steady. Everyone couldn't help but look over. In front of the heavy cavalry, the 3 generals narrowed their eyes. Was this the legend of Great Xia? He was really too young. Please, said the martial monarch, giving the strong cultivator in front of him enough respect. "Please," replied Prince Yen. After that, the martial monarch moved. He stepped on the ground and concentrated his divine power on his halberd. The world-shocking power caused the ground to crack. The powerful divine power spread all the way to Prince Yen. Facing the divine power, Prince Yen did not move at all. With a slight shift of his mind, the green and red swords flew out and streaked across the sky. They sliced through the air in front of the cracked ground. In the next moment, a huge gully appeared. The two forces collided with each other, and the color of the sky changed. Everything within 10 kilometers seemed to have been hit by a heavenly tribulation. The ground kept shaking. The two huge cracks continued to spread until they were 30 kilometers away. The two armies had no choice but to retreat another 5 kilometers. They watched the battle from 30 kilometers away. The power of a Xiantian expert wasn't something a human could resist. And a battle on the level of 3 disasters was even more disastrous. If you got too close and got caught in the shockwaves, it would be difficult to not die. In front of the Blackwater army, Marquis Victorious Return was silently watching the battle. He didn't have the slightest intention of helping. This was a fair battle. He wouldn't interfere. A man stood next to Marquis Victorious Return, nervously clenching her fists. She wasn't an idiot. Naturally, she could see that this battle wasn't simple. Good luck, good luck, good luck. A man was constantly cheering for Prince Yen. Ning Chen had taught her that when she couldn't help, cheering was also useful. Green and red breath at the same time. In the middle of the battle, the two swords flew into the sky. They were like rainbows as they transformed into streams of swords that rushed towards the martial monarch in front of them. It was a move that couldn't be dodged. It was the pinnacle of sword techniques. It was fast, accurate, and direct without any complicated changes. It was an ultimate move that sealed off all paths of retreat. The martial monarch focused. He didn't dare to be careless. The heavenly desolate halberd raised into the sky. His vast body drew upon the power of heaven and earth. The halberd light soared into the sky and collided with the streams of swords. In the shocking collision, the majority of the streams of swords turned invisible. But there was still a sword that quietly broke through the obstruction and passed through the martial monarch's body. The unrivaled martial monarch was forced back half a step. He was the first to be injured. The expert martial monarch wiped his hand, and the bleeding stopped. For the first time since the start of the battle, he was completely focused. On the other side, Prince Yin calmly watched. He didn't take the opportunity to attack. This battle wouldn't end so quickly. At the beginning, it was only a test. In the Netherworld Underworld, Ning Chun stood at the entrance of the Netherworld Underworld. He looked towards the distant west with worry in his eyes. Although he had confidence in his senior, he couldn't help but worry. Normal people only had one chi. There would always be times when their true chi couldn't keep up. Especially when changing techniques, it was even more obvious. On the other hand, martial monarchs with 2 chi could heal as they fought. As long as it wasn't an irreversible injury, they were practically undying. That was also the main reason why martial monarchs were undefeatable. There were only 2 ways to defeat a martial monarch. The first was to use absolute strength to suppress the martial monarch, so that his healing speed couldn't keep up with the speed of his injuries. The second was to destroy the threat of the dual chi-Cs. The first method didn't even need to be considered. In this world, there were people who could fight against martial monarchs, but there was no one who could completely suppress a martial monarch. Of course, if 2 experts above the 3 disaster realm joined hands, perhaps they could do it. But that was impossible. After all, in this world, there was only one person as shameless as the Golden Staff Imperial Teacher. So the only feasible method was to destroy the threat of the dual chi-Cs. Chapter 175. In the west of the Great Xia, the Blackwater Army and the cavalry of the God's sect were facing each other. The battle between the 2 armies had reached its climax. After the initial probing, both of them brought out their true strength. The clash of swords and halberds caused the sky to collapse and the earth to sink. Huge gullies appeared between the 2 of them. The powerful shockwaves caused everything around them to turn invisible. Broken stones filled the sky and scattered 3,000 feet away. This was a battle between true experts. It was fair and just. No one else could interfere. The martial lord's might was astonishing. The Sky Baron halberd was like a weapon that could destroy the world. Every time he waved it, a huge crack appeared in the sky. It was difficult to withstand this power. The Yin Prince raised the two swords in his hands as if they were light. One was fast, the other was slow. The fast one suppressed the enemy first. The slow one neutralized the enemy's power. The two swords worked together. Their attacks were fierce, and their defense was tight. They were not at a disadvantage at all. The Yin Prince of the Great Xia is so capable, said a general of the God's sect in shock. This person's sword seems to be able to predict the enemy's moves. He can always react before the martial lord makes a move. Unbelievable, said another general of the God's sect in confusion. It's not that he can predict the enemy's moves. The third general of the God's sect slowly shook his head and denied. It's accurate and very fast. The martial lord's moves have just started, and the red sword has already attacked. The martial lord didn't have enough power, and his moves were already weak. That's why it seems like the opponent has predicted the enemy's moves. The other two focused. After observing for a long time, they discovered that the truth was as the former said. They couldn't help but frown. This battle seemed to be much more difficult than they had imagined. Of course, none of the three generals thought the martial lord would lose, because he had never lost before. That included when he faced the Sword of Sword City. The battle between the strongest was unimaginably fierce. The martial lord dominated the world with his unparalleled power. He could break 10,000 techniques with his power alone. The Sky Baron halberd was ferocious, and had been stained with the blood of countless experts. The legend of the Great Xia had cultivated for 27 years. He had formed his own way of the sword, and looked down on the past and present. The red sword in the Yin Prince's hand was like fire. It was astonishingly fast and left many wounds on the martial lord's body. However, the martial lord's recovery ability was unparalleled. No matter how fast the Yin Prince's sword was, he could not break the legend of the martial lord's immortal body. 3 moves of the imperial sky, 9 evils breaking sun chop. Tian Huang held up the sky. Around the martial monarch, thousands of evil energies rose continuously. Black gas spread, and the world lost its color. The sun-breaking technique frightened ghosts and gods. Everyone was shocked, especially the Marquis of Triumph. His expression was extremely serious. That day he had been injured by this very attack. The strength of a martial lord did not only lie in their undying body. Even in terms of absolute battle power, they were unparalleled in the world. Prince Yin quickly sheathed his green sword. He waved his hand, and a beam of light darker than the night flew out. It swallowed everything, including the surrounding space. Abyss condensation. The expressions of the 3 generals changed greatly. The divine sect, and the people of the world had been searching for the sealed sword for thousands of years. One sword forbids martial arts, no Tao under the heavens. The sword of seals, the forbidden technique. The abyss in Prince Yan's hand swallowed up the sky and earth. Black light spread out and destroyed everything. Extreme moves collided, causing a huge explosion. Heaven and earth once again suffered a calamity. Sand was thrown into disorder, and the earth was lifted up. The destruction was unbearable to look at. Pa! The sound of blood dripping could be heard. In the sand 2 figures appeared. Blood quietly dripped from the corners of their mouths, and dripped down to their feet, dyeing the earth red. The 2 were both injured. After one move, they were evenly matched. Prince Yan's eyes gradually turned cold. His figure flashed, and he instantly appeared in front of the martial monarch. The speed of his red sword suddenly increased. One sword was fast, and the other was even faster. It was hard to keep up. The halberd in the martial monarch's hand met the sword. He was not afraid at all. If he could not win in terms of absolute speed, then he would use absolute power to break through. The martial monarch's tactic of not dodging caused the power of the legendary sword of the Xia dynasty to decrease by 30%. The advantage of the undying body was completely revealed. In the deadlock, it was hard to tell who had the upper hand. This was a battle between strength and speed. It was also a battle of patience. 3 disaster-level Xiantian experts had sufficient true qi, and could use the power of heaven and earth. Unless there was an absolute suppression, it would be difficult to determine the winner in a short time. Between the two armies, more than 20 miles of land had already collapsed. There were huge gullies everywhere, and the ground was 3 feet deep. It was extremely terrifying. Beside Marquis Kaishian, a man's cultivation was limited. She could not see the situation of the battlefield clearly. She simply closed her eyes and silently said, "Senior, you can do it. Senior, you can do it." Although most of the soldiers in the two armies could not see the situation of the battle clearly, looking at the terrifying scene of the sky collapsing in front of them, each one was more shocked than the other. In the past, the battle between Marquis Kaishian and the martial monarch would try to avoid people as much as possible. Moreover, the battle would end very quickly. It was the first time for them to see a battle between 3 disaster-level Xiantian experts. It was hard to believe that this was not human strength, but divine power. It was no wonder that a barren city in the east could shake the world. It was no wonder that a broken temple in the southwest could become a Buddhist country. With such an expert here, not to mention 1,000 soldiers, even 10,000 horses would not be able to do anything. The sun rose in the west. In the blink of an eye, it was already noon. The battle between the two was white-hot. Prince Qin Huang's 2 swords, one attacking and one defending. The red sword's sharpness had already reached its peak. It was so fast that only a rainbow was left. It could no longer be seen by the naked eye. The martial monarch did not dodge. He was 70% attacking and 30% defending. The divine power was hard to block. The abyss-transforming divine power completely swallowed the abyss-transforming divine power. It became the biggest barrier for Prince Qin Huang to fight until now. Just as the sun was high in the sky, the martial monarch suddenly took a sword head-on. Immediately after, he pushed Prince Qin Huang back with a palm. He waved his halberd and condensed qi. The martial monarch's supreme martial art appeared again. 3 moves of the imperial sky, God destroying heaven. The peerless ominous weapon exploded with a power that surpassed the limits of the world. It was a move that could kill gods if gods blocked it. It was unstoppable. Facing the martial monarch's divine power, the red sword in Prince Qin Huang's hand, and the abyss-condensing divine power all flew out. In the next moment, the sword frame began to tremble. The green sword soared into the sky. The 3 swords appeared together and revolved, forming a huge whirlpool. 3 swords in the sky, life and death contract. An endless rain of swords flew out of the whirlpool and crashed down. At the same time, the ominous weapons descended and collided violently. The strongest moves collided with the most shocking power. The ground within 20 miles collapsed with a loud rumble. Large chunks of earth were lifted up and collapsed, forming a terrifying scene of apocalypse. The soldiers of both armies were all frozen. They were completely stunned by this unimaginable scene. The martial monarch flew backward, and the legends were dyed red. In the violent aftermath, both of them were heavily injured. Up until now, the battle that seemed to be evenly matched finally started to tilt. As the two's true qi ran out, the martial monarch flipped his left hand and slapped out. The powerful palm force forced Prince Qin Huang in front of him. Dual sea of qi, alternating between attack and defense. At this moment, he displayed an absolute advantage. He changed his moves so quickly that it was unparalleled in the world. Prince Qin Huang forcefully raised his true qi and waved his hand. The sand sword flew out and turned into a sand waterfall in front of him. The power of the palm was shocking. With a bang, the sand waterfall dispersed and landed on Prince Qin Huang's body, bringing out a smear of red blood. The legend of the Great Xia was finally showing signs of defeat. What a pity! The 3 generals of the Eternal Night cult side. The legend of the Great Xia had already done enough. However, the martial monarch was still undefeatable. The outcome of this battle had already been decided. The next battle would be life and death. On the other side, the expression of the Marquis of Triumph's manner became abnormally heavy. Even the legend of the Great Xia was about to be defeated. Could it be that the martial monarch was truly undefeatable? No matter how delightful the battle is, there must be an end. Prince Qin Huang of the Great Xia, you have no regrets. In the battlefield, the martial monarch moved. He raised his halberd and lightning condensed. He wanted to end the legend of the great Xia with one strike. Prince Qin Wang coughed out a mouthful of blood, but his expression was still as calm as before. With a move of his hand, the green and red swords flew over, and his figure flashed. That day, before Ning Chun went into seclusion, he said many things. Among them, the most important thing was the possible way to break the dual Sea of Qi. Senior, the martial monarch's dual Sea of Qi is strong because he can quickly recover his Qi when attacking and defending. He doesn't need to rest. When defending, he can also fight while recovering his injuries. However, that doesn't mean there is no solution. Everything has its advantages and disadvantages. The martial monarch has an extra Sea of Qi. At the same time he has the advantage of using his true Qi. It also means he has an extra fatal flaw. No matter how strong his innate recovery ability is, after his Sea of Qi is broken, he cannot recover in a short period of time. Moreover, martial monarchs have always been used to fighting with dual Sea of Qi. Once one of them is broken, the martial monarch's attacks will be greatly affected, and more flaws will appear. However, if you want to break one of the martial monarch's Sea of Qi, you must first find the location of the second Sea of Qi. Since the location of the first Sea of Qi is known by everyone, the martial monarch's protection towards that Sea of Qi must be the tightest. In other words, since no one knows the location of the second Sea of Qi, the martial monarch's protection towards it will be relatively weaker. On the other hand, since martial monarchs have the advantage of dual Sea of Qi, there is an 80–90% chance that they will have the same problem as the undying body. This is something I personally experienced after fighting with Underworld Child. Because I know that normal injuries won't have any effect. In battle, it will be unavoidable to use the body to take on some attacks. This is the advantage of the undying body, but it is also a weakness that can be exploited. Senior, you can feel the aura of the sword, and your attacks are quick and accurate. There won't be the slightest difference. So, you are the person most likely to find the second Sea of Qi of the martial monarch. In battle, the more time passes, the more injuries there will be. This is a natural thing and no one will doubt it. To the martial monarch, his injuries will quickly recover, so he won't care. So senior, you only need to remember where your sword has stabbed. After eliminating those places, it will be the location of the second Sea of Qi. That day, after hearing those words, Prince Yin could only remain silent. He sighed in his heart. The defeat of the abbot of the Dewey Temple was not unjustified. That child's mind was truly terrifying. In the world, in the past 10,000 years, there had only been one time where someone in the postnatal realm fought against someone in the Three Disasters realm, the Battle of Mijia Mountain. Looking at it now, the defeat of the Buddha in the mortal world was not unjustified. The words continuously reverberated in his ears. Prince Yan's gaze was like lightning as he looked at the sword wounds that had already completely recovered on the martial monarch's body. His two swords left his hands and quickly flew out. Azure and red breath simultaneously, one breath reckless. Chapter 176. The green and red swords intertwined, forming a bright rainbow light. They intersected and spiraled, directly attacking the only two acupoints on Wu Jun's body that had no sword marks. The two swords broke the acupoints. After this attack, Wu Jun's second Qi Si would finally appear in the world. The sword light followed, unavoidable and unavoidable. In the blink of an eye, it was already in front of him. Wu Jun ignored the green sword. Tian Huang slashed down, blocking the red sword with all his strength. In the next moment, the green sword passed through his body, bringing out a beautiful flower of blood. Clang! There was an ear-piercing collision. The moment the sword and halberd collided, the red sword flew away, and the halberd trembled. Prince Yan's eyes suddenly became sharp. His body rushed forward, and the sand sword quickly condensed in his hand, turning into the thinnest sword in the world. The moment the halberd trembled and deviated, the sand sword brushed past Tian Huang's body and pierced 2 inches below Wu Jun's heart. Ugh! The sand sword entered his body. Wu Jun groaned and retreated half a step. Blood flowed out of his mouth. His undying body was finally broken. Ha! Wu Jun shouted. Enduring the pain in his heart, he flipped his left palm and forcefully counterattacked. With a loud bang, the two collided. Prince Yan was thrown back more than 10 feet. After landing, a trace of blood quietly slid down from the corner of his mouth. Ugh! On the other side, Wu Jun retreated 2 steps. The aura around his body was violently chaotic. His true qi surged, scattering in all directions from his destroyed qi sea. For the first time since the battle started, he showed signs of defeat. In front of the 2 armies, the 3 generals and Marquis' triumphant return were startled. Soon after, as if they had thought of something, their expressions changed. Wu Jun was about to lose. The sand sword scattered, turning into a stream of light and entering the sword frame. Blood flowed out of Wu Jun's chest. It was extremely dazzling. The legend of the great Xia deserves his reputation. Come again. Wu Jun stepped forward and laughed heartily. His arrogance did not decrease, and his blood did not stop flowing. He raised his halberd and attracted lightning. His divine power shook the world. Prince Yan waited with full concentration. He did not let down his guard because he had destroyed Wu Jun's qi sea. He had never thought that Wu Jun would lose so easily. There were 5 3-disaster realm experts in the world. Apart from the legend of the Eternal Night sect who had never appeared, Wu Jun was the undisputed number 1 of the remaining 4. To be able to sit at the top of the world, he could not just rely on his undying body. There were also Buddhas in the human world, but unfortunately, he was the weakest one. The green sword vibrated and flew back into Prince Yan's hand. The surrounding temperature suddenly dropped. At this moment, even the ground began to freeze. The white world spread and turned into a world of ice crystals. Heaven and earth were frozen, and all living things seemed to be dead. In the silent world, all sound had disappeared, and there was only the sound of swords and people. In the next moment, lightning descended from the 9 heavens, breaking this silent scene. The sea of lightning surged like the cries of 1,000 birds, as it rapidly disintegrated the world of ice and snow. The halberd was blocked by the green sword. The ground beneath their feet sank by 3 feet, and collapsed once again. The martial monarch's tyrannical move was world-shocking. The azure sword violently trembled, as if it was emitting a mournful cry. Hearing the sword aura, Prince Yan's expression changed slightly. His body flashed and he retreated 10 feet away. This battle ends here. With a wave of his hand, the green sword returned to its stand. The sword stand disappeared and fell in front of Aman. Aman, let's go. Prince Yan's figure flickered as he arrived before them, and said calmly. Aman's eyes were wide open and filled with confusion. He didn't know what was going on. Within the battlefield, the martial monarch frowned, but he didn't stop them. Aman foolishly carried the sword stand and left. Marquis Kaixien and the martial monarch had no choice but to give the order to retreat. Senior, did you win? Asked Aman curiously. No. Prince Yan shook his head. Are you lost? Aman was a bit disappointed. You also didn't lose. Prince Yan shook his head once more. Then it was a draw? Asked Aman with certainty this time. Prince Yan smiled. Not really. The battle just didn't end. Oh. Aman was first startled, but then he understood. If they didn't want to fight, then so be it. Not fighting was the right thing to do. The 2 of them stayed in the Blackwater Army's camp for a short while before leaving on the same day. Marquis Kaixien asked for the reason, and then didn't stay any longer. He watched them leave. Although this battle hadn't ended, at the very least they had confirmed the location of their second Dantian Sea of Qi. They still had hope of defeating the martial monarchs in the future. Senior, where are we going? A man walked a few steps before being pulled down. He then ran a few steps to catch up. The Confucian sect. Prince Yan walked in front. Why are we going to the Confucian sect? A man didn't know anything about the Confucian sect, but he still asked curiously. To replenish my sword, said Prince Yan calmly. The martial monarch truly was very strong. Furthermore, he still had a trump card he hadn't used. He didn't know whether or not he could win, but he knew that if they continued fighting, the azure sword would definitely break. The 2 swords were a pair of swords. If one was broken, the other would quickly lose its spirituality. Every sword was very important in a battle. If he deliberately didn't use the azure sword, it was almost impossible to defeat the martial monarch. Fortunately, He had completed the task Ning Chun had entrusted him with. A day later, Ning Chun walked out of the underworld and headed to the northern battlefield. Ning Chun's appearance in Marquis Bloodrobe's camp startled Marquis Bloodrobed, who was reading a secret report from a spy. The figure in front of him was so familiar. Other than that slightly pale face that hadn't seen the sun for a long time, everything else about him was the same as before. "Marquis, long time no see," greeted Ning Chun with a light smile. "As expected, you're still alive." Marquis Bloodrobed came back to his senses and sighed. Hearing from others and seeing with one's own eyes were two different things. Now that he saw Ning Chun in person, he finally believed this fact. After a simple greeting, the two of them brought the topic to the battle between Northern Meng and Great Xia. As Ning Chun listened to Marquis Bloodrobe's narration, his expression became more and more serious. The situation was far more troublesome than he had imagined. Originally, he had thought that when the wheat valleys in the north ripened, they would be able to force the Northern Meng army to the southeast of Great Xia. In the future, they would be able to use the advantage of the terrain to slow down the Northern Meng army's southward advance. Who would have thought that Fan Lingyue would see through it and turn the tables on Great Xia? Now that Northern Meng had charged out of the encirclement, they were unstoppable and left Great Xia in a sorry state. Ning Chun took 2 steps forward. Looking at the map, he was silent for a long time. It was already the middle of the 7th month. It should have been the time of the year when the rain was the heaviest. However, there wasn't much rain in the north of Great Xia this year. This also made it easier for Northern Meng to invade the south. Even the heavens weren't on Great Xia's side. It wouldn't be easy for Great Xia to turn the situation around. "How far are we from Northern Meng?" Ning Chun asked. "A day and a half. However, with just my troops, I won't be able to stop the Northern Meng army," Marquis Bloodrobed replied. No matter how strong the Imperial Guards were, they wouldn't be able to stop the Northern Meng cavalry on the plains. The difference in mobility was too great. "Let's speed up. Reinforcements should be arriving soon," Ning Chun slowly said. On the western battlefield, regardless of the outcome of the battle between the senior and the martial monarchs, the martial monarchs would be heavily injured. Without the martial monarchs, the threat of the Divine Sect's army would be greatly reduced. With Marquis Kaishian and the Blackwater army holding the fort, it would be enough to deter them. The reinforcements sent to the west could be changed to the north to reinforce the more urgent northern battlefield. The battle report from the west should have already reached Xiamingri. Now they just had to wait for the reinforcements from the west to arrive. What happened? Marquis Bloodrobe's expression was grave. Ning Chun simply told him about Prince Yan's journey to the west. The senior said that he needed to take care of some matters and would only be able to arrive in about a month. Calculating the time, it should be about time. "Are you confident?" Marquis Bloodrobed asked seriously. He wasn't familiar with Prince Yan and had only heard of some past events. However, the martial monarchs were truly the #1 expert in the world. It was hard to believe that Prince Yan had the strength to fight against a martial monarch. "Yes, don't worry." Ning Chun nodded. "Okay, I'll bet with you." Marquis Bloodrobed made a prompt decision. Right now there was no other way. If they followed the prescribed order, the Great Xia would only be defeated step by step. It was better to take a gamble. If what Ning Chun said was true and reinforcements would arrive soon, then if they suddenly followed, they would be able to give the Northern Meng army a surprise. No matter how powerful that military advisor was, it was impossible for him to predict everything. The two of them carefully discussed the details. Marquis Bloodrobed was a general who had experienced hundreds of battles. His grasp of the details was not something that Ning Chun could compare to. Most of the time, Ning Chun listened to Marquis Bloodrobed. Only when he was certain that it wasn't appropriate would he say a few words and simply state his own thoughts. Every time this happened, Marquis Bloodrobed would think for a long time and carefully consider Ning Chun's suggestion. Most of Ning Chun's ideas were very unique and jumpy, giving Marquis Bloodrobed an indescribable feeling. It was very awkward, but when he thought about it carefully, it wasn't without reason. Although the tactical thinking of the two worlds was similar, there were still differences. Through Ning Chun and Marquis Bloodrobed, they constantly clashed that night. There was no such thing as a perfect tactic, As a result, the two of them spent most of the night discussing, constantly rejecting and being rejected. Seeing that it was getting late, Ningchen glanced at the sky outside the tent and said, "As for Jingwu Duke, I'll leave it to you to send a message. I'll be leaving first." "You're not staying?" Marquis Bloodrobed asked. "Marquis, don't you know that I can't see the light of day?" Ningchen pointed to the sky in the east and smiled. Marquis Bloodrobed was startled and then deeply sighed. How could he not know? That day the entire world had seen it clearly. When he saw Ningchen arrive, he thought that the matter had already been resolved. "Marquis, there's no need to be sad. Being able to survive is already a blessing for Ningchen. I can't ask for too much." Ningchen cupped his fists and bowed. "All right, I won't say any more goodbyes. Until we meet again." After Ningchen left, Marquis Bloodrobed walked out of the tent. Looking at Ningchen's gradually disappearing figure, he was silent. The favor that Grand Xia owed him could no longer be paid off. For the sake of Grand Xia, Jiming Marquis had given up his life, his emotions, his reputation, and everything else. Apart from the few people who knew the truth, the majority of Grand Xia's commoners viewed Jiming Marquis as an executioner and a symbol of evil. The commoners were ignorant, but they couldn't give up because of this. As marquises, they had to protect this country and its millions of commoners. There was no excuse. The glory of marquises was something that had been exchanged with the blood of their ancestors for 1,000 years. He, Marquis Triumphant Return, Marquis Jiming, and the other 7 marquises of this generation were walking down this path until death. Chapter 177. 7,000 miles northeast of Sword City, at the end of the world, an ordinary-looking man sat quietly. He looked at the sea of chaotic fog 30,000 feet below him, waiting silently. The man looked to be in his 30s. There was nothing special about him. He sat there motionlessly. He was Mubai Desolate City's sword. He couldn't see anything beyond the end of the continent. Only when he looked down could he see the endless fog 30,000 feet below him. This was the appearance of the world. If Ningchen was here, he would be shocked speechless. This world was completely different from the world in his mind. This world had an end. Mubai was waiting for the sea of chaotic fog to take shape. Once it took shape, it would be the best material in the world for refining weapons. Since swords in the human world were easy to break, he would find materials outside the human world to refine them. "Uncle," Mu Qingxue walked over and looked at the figure at the end of the world. "You shouldn't have come here. You still have unfinished business in the human world," said Mubai indifferently without turning around. "I've already repaid the favor that Desolate City owes me. Now I have nothing to worry about," said Mu Qingxue. "You still have a favor to repay. Go back." As soon as he finished speaking, the wind and clouds changed. Sword Qi brought Mu Qingxue to the end of the world, only dissipating after he was 1,000 miles away. Forgetting doesn't mean you've seen through it. Your Tao is in the human world, not here. In the future, don't come back. The last words echoed between heaven and earth. Mu Qingxue's eyes flashed with confusion. Did she forget something important? If it was important, why would she forget? In the underworld, Ningchen looked to the east in silence. He didn't move for a long time. Was she okay? He didn't know where the love came from, but it went deeper without any reason. When he found out, she had already forgotten. 2 hours later, the figure in the underworld disappeared. He sat on the ghost sedan chair and went south. Love always made people lose themselves. He still had things to do, so he couldn't be distracted. The ghost sedan chair went south in a flash. An hour later, it landed outside the Imperial Palace. Ningchen put away the ghost sedan chair and walked toward the Imperial Palace. When the Imperial Army guards saw Ningchen, they immediately stepped aside and bowed respectfully. "Marquis." One figure after another followed Ningchen's steps and knelt down until they reached the Heavenly Mandate Palace. The dragon guards knelt before their Marquis. Their expressions were calm and respectful. In Great Xia, perhaps only the dragon guards in front of him had unwavering faith in their lord. Xia Mingri was still in the Heavenly Mandate Palace. Just like Emperor Xia of old, he read memorials day and night. In the 1,000 years of Great Xia's history, other than Xia Rui, All the Xia emperors could be said to be wise emperors. This was undoubtedly a miracle. Before Xia Rui experienced the upheaval, he was also a diligent ruler. Unfortunately, he became a tyrant because of his jealousy and paranoia. Xia Mingri had only ascended the throne for a short period of time. So far, he had shown a good temperament. However, there were many monarchs who could share weal and woe together, but not share riches and honor. No one knew whether Xia Mingri was such a person or not. Ningchen did not care about these things. Among the 4 princes of the great Xia dynasty, apart from Xia Zi, the most talented one was actually the 3rd prince. However, talent did not necessarily mean that he was suitable for the position of Emperor Xia. Xia Yinwu was too confident. He was like Xia Rui in the past, always thinking that everything was in his hands. The only difference was that Xia Yinwu was stronger. Therefore, in the face of Fan Lingyue's solicitation, he would agree without hesitation. Xia Mingri was the exact opposite. Compared to the 3rd prince, Xia Mingri was more patient and cautious. Of course, he was forced by the situation at that time and had no choice. In the past, Xia Yinwu might have been a better candidate for Emperor Xia. However, now that the world was in chaos and Fan Lingyue was still alive, Xia Yinwu's arrogance would be a disaster for Great Xia. In the Heavenly Mandate Palace, Ning Chun and Xia Mingri talked for a long time. The guards and eunuchs in front of the palace had all left. No one knew what they talked about. For hours later, Ning Chun left and went straight north. The ghost sedan drove for 700 miles. At the same time, a beautiful figure flashed past. Her clothes were whiter than snow. There was no trace of emotion on her perfect face. She was like a fairy from the 9 heavens. She was so extraordinary that no one dared to look at her directly. Mu Qingxue. After Ning Chun felt a familiar aura in front of him, he stopped the ghost sedan and made way. If this was just a chance encounter, he would pretend that he did not know. He was waiting for her to leave. Unfortunately, Mu Qingxue also stopped. Their eyes met. They looked through the curtains of the ghost sedan. The person who had once protected him had now become the most familiar stranger. Her indifferent eyes still did not have the slightest ripple. The scabbed wound in Ning Chen's heart was torn open again. Besides pain, there was only pain. "Miss, please make way." Ning Chen endured the pain in his heart and said, "Return the scroll of life, and I will let you live." Mu Qingxue said lightly. "Impossible." Ning Chen refused without hesitation. He could give up the scroll of earth and the scroll of heaven. Only the scroll of life was absolutely impossible. If he returned it, then there would be nothing between them. After getting a negative answer, Mu Qingxue moved. He unsheathed the Qingying sword and turned into the fastest shadow in the world. In a flash, he was in front of the sedan. The 3-meter-long ghost sedan became the cruelest battlefield. The sword was merciless. The ink sword came out and blocked the Qingying sword with a clang. The 2 swords collided. The aftershock spread and the ghost sedan immediately scattered. Ning Chun retreated 3 steps, slightly at a disadvantage. Peak 9th grade. Mu Qingxue's eyes flashed with a strange light. The first time they met in Desolate City, the person in front of him was only a 6th grade Hotian realm cultivator. He didn't expect that in just half a year, he would reach the peak of the Heavens Reach realm. "Miss, please make way." Ning Chen's expression was complicated. There was no reply. Only the sword light was like lightning. It was a person who had forgotten the past. The sword light was cold, emotionless. Ning Chen sighed, and no longer said anything. The ink sword condensed into frost, the wind and snow opening the path to heaven. The exchange of swords was fast. Mu Qingxue's speed was unparalleled under the heavens. He was so fast that even his afterimages could not be seen. The ink sword in Ning Chen's hand was 90% offensive and 10% defensive. Apart from the sword light piercing towards his dantian, it did not care about anything else. Mu Qingxue's expression became even colder. His figure flashed and he appeared in the air. The Qingying sword rapidly spun, and the mist in the sky condensed into sword qi, forming a beautiful pair of snow-white wings behind him. Sword leaving scars. In the blink of an eye, the beautiful figure in the air disappeared. The sword had left a scar and pierced through her body. Ugh! Ning Chen let out a muffled groan. Ignoring the pain in his chest, he grabbed the Chengying sword and slashed down. Mu Qingshua's figure rapidly retreated until he was 30 meters away. Looking at Ning Chun, his eyes narrowed. Undying body. You can't kill me. Ning Chun pulled out the Chengying sword from his chest. As he spoke, black blood dripped down from his chest and onto the ground. The vegetation around him quickly withered, losing all vitality. The Chengying sword trembled, resisting the blood on the sword, unwilling to yield. Ning Chun sighed inwardly. His left hand shook, dispersing the blood on the sword. Then he waved his hand and returned the sword. Mu Qingxue received the Chengying sword and frowned. For a moment he hesitated. Miss, if you want to take back the life-returning scroll, there's no need to rush. I consumed the Yellow Springs flower, and won't be able to live for long. Desolate City has already waited for over 1,000 years. A few more months won't matter, said Ningchen softly. You know who I am? A cold light flashed through Mu Qingshue's eyes. I was once the head of the Grand Court for a period of time. I was always able to find out things that ordinary people don't know. Miss, your surname is Mu, and the Xian Empire's imperial family is also surnamed Mu. More importantly, after the Xian Empire was destroyed, no one knew the whereabouts of the life-returning scroll. The Grand Xia searched for 1,000 years, but still couldn't find it. Ning Chun raised his head and stared into Mu Qingshue's eyes. If I'm not wrong, Miss and that senior in Desolate City should be the descendants of the Xian Empire's imperial family. Hearing that, killing intent rose in Mu Qingshue's eyes. His figure flashed, and he instantly appeared in front of Ning Chun. Ning Chun let go of the sword between his fingers and took a few steps back. He said, Miss, I'll say it again. You can't kill me. Besides, I'm not the only one who suspects or even knows about this matter. There's really no need to kill me to silence me. What are you trying to say? Asked Mu Qingxue coldly. Ning Chun thought for a moment and said, I want to make a deal with you. What deal? Asked Mu Qingxue. It's very simple. A life for a life. As long as you stay by my side in the future if there's a crisis, I hope you can help me once. In return, when the Yellow Springs poison flares up in a few months, you can kill me as easily as blowing off dust and take away the life scroll, suggested Ning Chun. Mu Qingxue didn't say anything. Plus the earth-returning scroll. Ning Chun released the aura of the earth-returning scroll. Mu Qingxue was tempted and hesitated. And the heaven-returning scroll. Ning Chun continued to tempt him. Deal. Mu Qingxue nodded and made a prompt decision. After the deal, Ning Chun's expression didn't change. He waved his hand to gather the ghost palanquin again, and continued north. Where did you get so many heavenly tomes? Mu Qingxue asked the first question in his heart. Desolate City had only obtained one heaven-returning scroll in 1,000 years. And in this world, it was already difficult to obtain one heaven-returning scroll. Who would have thought that this young man would have 3? Ning Chun honestly said, The life-returning scroll was given to me by you. The earth-returning scroll was picked up by me. And the heaven-returning scroll was stolen from a tomb. Mu Qingxue frowned and said, I don't know you. We used to know each other, but you forgot, said Ning Chun slowly. Mu Qingxue closed his eyes, unwilling to speak. The corner of Ning Chun's mouth curled up into an almost undetectable smile. Being able to keep her by his side for these next few months was also good. If the poison really flared up in a few months, these 3 heavenly tomes would be useless to him. He might as well give them to her. He wanted to thank his senior for giving him 6 or 7 months of sober time. He wanted to live a long life, and he wanted to see Mu Qingxue while he was still alive. That was enough, truly enough. Chapter 178. In the northern Ming camp, an urgent secret letter was sent to the commander's tent. After reading it, Fan Lingyue's expression changed slightly. King Yin went west to challenge Martial Lord. Martial Lord was seriously injured, and the Divine Sect's heavy cavalry retreated 200 miles and did not come out. Fan Lingyue got up and came to the army's marching map. After carefully considering for a long time, just as he was about to give an order, he saw a familiar figure walk in. It's you. Long time no see. Looking at each other, the coldest killing intent was aroused. Fan Lingyue looked at the figure in front of him, After a short moment of surprise, he stretched out his slender hand, pressing forward. Ning Chen moved his feet, his sword fingers condensing frost, and similarly met the attack. There was no conversation, no hypocrisy, only cold killing intent. The two moves collided, and the aftermath spread out. The commander's tent could not withstand the scattered sword power, and was torn apart. Neither of them showed mercy. Today was different from the past. With the opponent dead, this battle had no more variables. The chill on the sword fingers was bone-chilling, and the white light on the slender hand was even more ruthless. In the instant of the collision, the killing intent was brilliant. The big movement in the commander's tent attracted the attention of several generals in the army who were closest, and they quickly rushed over. Under the night sky in the distance, Mu Qingxue watched the battle, without the slightest intention of going forward to help. Among the 7 generals who rushed over, 4 of them were above the 9th rank. Without saying anything, they immediately joined the battle. Ning Chen blocked 5 by himself, the cold light on his hand becoming sharper and sharper. Proud of his courage, he did not fall into a disadvantage. The silver light on his sword fingers was extremely bright. Among the 5, Fan Lingyue was the strongest, blocking most of the attacks. The other 4 supported with all their strength, cooperating well. For a time they were in a stalemate. The movement of the battle was getting bigger and bigger. After the arrival of the 7 generals, another 9th-ranked late-stage expert came to join the battle. 6 against 1, they killed the intruder. Facing 6 people, Ning Chen used his full strength for the first time. His sword moved without end, and sword qi wrapped around his fingers, blocking the 6 people's attacks. The fierce battle of the powerful heavens reach realm made the surrounding soldiers below the 9th rank not dare to take half a step closer, for fear of being involved and dying in vain. The battle became more and more intense, and the situation became more and more stalemate. Ning Chen's mind was highly focused, but there was always an indescribable sense of inconsistency. Fan Lingyue's performance was strong enough, but it was still not enough. The invincible white light of the past seemed to be much weaker today. Ning Chen could not afford to be distracted in a battle. He did not have time to think. He flipped his left hand, and his qi caused waves to surge. The sky and earth changed and blue waves surged. He used the Zhongsun lineage's supreme art again. Waves shake the heavens and earth as one. Monstrous waves split the heavens and the earth, instantly sending the 5-rank, 9 powerhouses flying. Fan Lingyue hesitated for a moment, then moved his feet, and retreated 100 feet, temporarily avoiding the attack. Ning Chen frowned. What was going on? With Fan Lingyue's strength, he shouldn't be so passive. At the thought of this, Ning Chen's figure flashed and charged forward. With his unparalleled foundation and immortal body, he forced the former to use his full strength. Fan Lingyue wasn't willing to meet him head-on. Half of his power was on the offensive, and the other half was on the defensive. He was still as valiant as before, but he lacked the overwhelming boldness of the past. Cough cough. After their palms collided, both of them retreated 30 feet back. Fan Lingyue was about to make another move, when he suddenly staggered and coughed violently, while covering his mouth. Ning Chen squinted his eyes and said coldly, "So your body's condition is much worse than I expected. However, only against you. I won't say anything about a fair fight." As he said this, Ning Chen once again charged forward. His fingertip condensed into frost, pressing forward. Just at this moment, a sharp halberd light appeared and chopped down. Ning Chen's eyes turned cold, his body tilted, and his sword fingers flipped over. With a clang, the halberd light was pushed aside. "Jiming Marquis, you dare to attack the northern Ming camp alone. Is it because you're confident, or because you don't know your place?" Qing Wuya walked out and stood between the two of them. The halberd in his hand was dazzling and filled with killing intent. Qing Wuya. Ning Chen recognized him right away. This person should be the person with the most power and prestige in the northern Ming army apart from Fan Lingyue. Unfortunately, power and influence were not equal. He came at the right time. Seeing Qing Wuya rush over, Fan Lingyue suppressed the pain in his body and walked forward. He calmly said, "Qing Wuya, immediately take 30,000 light cavalry to delay the blood Marquis of Great Xia." Great Xia's reinforcements will arrive soon. But advisor you. Qing Wuyo's expression was a little hesitant. No buts. Go. Fan Lingyue coldly shouted. Yes. Qing Wuyo accepted the order and immediately wanted to leave. It's too late. Tonight, no one will be able to leave. Before he finished speaking, Ning Chen's figure had already disappeared. When he appeared again, he was already in front of Qing Wuyo. His sword pierced through the air, the cold light piercing to the bone. At the same time, Fan Lingyue also followed. A white light rose from her slender hand, extremely dazzling. Ning Chen flipped his left palm, and his palm met Fan Lingyue's. Immediately, he felt his true qi drain away, and he had no more strength left. A strange technique appeared once again. Ning Chen immediately retracted his true qi and retreated 10 feet. Go! Fan Lingyue coldly said. Qing Wuyo did not dare to delay, and quickly left. Do you think you can leave? Ning Chen coldly snorted and took out the Deathbreaker bow. In the bright silver light, 3 arrows pierced through the air. The 3 terrifying arrows chased after the stars and the moon, surpassing the limits of space. In the blink of an eye, they arrived in front of Qing Wuyo. In the next moment, blood splattered everywhere. Qing Wuyo blocked the first 2 arrows, but he could not block the third. In an instant he was heavily injured. You're the one courting death. Seeing her subordinates injured one after another, anger flashed through Fan Lingyue's eyes. Her black hair danced, and the white light around her flourished. She raised her technique to the peak. Ning Chen did not dare to be careless. Facing an opponent who had finally used her full strength, he raised his hand and pointed, and the sword reflected the 9 heavens and the moon. 10,000-li raging waves split 10,000-li. Raging waves surged and roared. In the rolling waves, a sword split the sky and slashed down with a loud bang. Fan Lingyue was not afraid at all. He raised the raging waves with a single palm. In the brilliant white light, the sword intent of split the sky turned invisible and disappeared. The moment Ning Chen recovered his qi, Fan Lingyue's figure flashed. He flipped his palm and black blood dyed the sky. Just like the first time they fought, this was an unbelievably strong opponent. Blood dripped from the corner of Ning Chen's mouth. His expression was grave. He did not believe that there was an absolutely invincible technique in this world. Even the undying body had flaws, let alone a technique that was cultivated after birth. Fury of the 9 heavens. In order to test the limits of Fan Lingyue's technique, Ning Chen once again activated his true qi. With a flip of his palm, blue waves covered the sky and earth. A divine waterfall fell from the sky with a loud bang. Stupid! Fan Lingyue stretched out his right hand. The fury of the 9 heavens dissipated. In the next moment, a vast palm pressed down and blood splattered 3 feet away. The angry Fan Lingyue was like a goddess of war from the heavens. Divine light covered her body, and her pair of white hands were invincible. She was so powerful that she was invincible. The northern Ming soldiers in the distance were shocked to see the military advisor, who had always been known for his wisdom, display such a terrifying strength. The military advisor's martial arts was no longer a secret, but no one expected him to be so powerful. Even an innate stage expert would not be so powerful. Ning Chen's chest felt heavy, and he vomited a mouthful of blood. He barely managed to stabilize his body. His expression did not change at all. He still believed that a perfect technique did not exist. It was just that he had not found a way to deal with it. In the distance, Mu Qingxue looked at the white light on Fan Lingyue's body and narrowed her eyes. She also did not know what technique this was to have such an absolutely invincible power. The situation of the battle changed so quickly. Fan Lingyue, who was still a little clumsy a moment ago, no longer cared about her body. She used all her strength, and immediately displayed an overwhelming and terrifying strength. They were all at the peak of the 9th grade. In the past there was the unshakable Son of God. Later, there was Xia Zi, Mu Qianshang and other outstanding geniuses. Ning Chen, who was the slowest, had also fought against innate stage experts and Buddha in the mortal world. There was no doubt that his strength was not inferior to any of the geniuses of the younger generation. Especially after coming out of seclusion this time, his cultivation had reached the peak of the 9th grade, and his strength had increased greatly. However, When facing Fan Lingyue, who was also at the peak of the Heaven's Reach realm, he was still in such a sorry state. There was no perfect person in the world, but there was Fan Lingyue. If not for her illness, no one could imagine how terrifying this woman would be. Ning Chen stretched out his hand and pulled out his ink sword. His figure flashed and his sword broke out. Since true chi was useless, he could only rely on his moves to win. The ink sword swung and frost fell from the sky. The sword in Ning Chen's hand moved faster and faster. When facing an invincible opponent, he tried his best to find a flaw. Fan Lingyue dealt with all changes by remaining unchanged. When the sword entered the white light, its speed immediately decreased by 70%, and its strength by 30%. It no longer had the power to kill the enemy. Her delicate hand shook the ink sword, causing a waterfall of water to splash. This was the frost melting, and could not exist in the lustrous white light. Sword light, white light, the battle was chaotic. Ning Chen used his sword as the main force and his aura as support, barely managing to fight. Fan Lingyue's mouth was bleeding. It was not an injury from the battle, but an outbreak of illness. Concerned about the situation of the battle, Fan Lingyue endured her illness and raised her strength again. The white light became even brighter, as if a second moon had risen and illuminated the world. Scroll of the Moon, silent moonfall. The scroll of the moon technique reappeared in the world. Instantly, wherever the moonlight shone, everything became silent and still. Seeing the heavenly book technique for the first time, Ning Chen was even more shocked. He was shocked that Fan Lingyue could use the scroll of the moon technique. He was shocked that his body could no longer move. He could not even circulate his true chi. The next moment, Fan Lingyue arrived in front of him. Her powerful palm force destroyed all of Ning Chen's heart meridians. Ugh! Ning Chen flew out, the blood in his mouth spilling onto the ground. He was extremely miserable. However, a shocking scene occurred. Ning Chen, who was supposed to be dead, staggered back to his feet. Undying body. Fan Lingyue narrowed her eyes and said slowly. Surprised, Ning Chen spat out a mouthful of blood and said sarcastically. Fan Lingyue snorted and said, "So what if you have an undying body? I don't believe that you won't die." After saying that, Fan Lingyue waved her hand. Not long after, under the commander's tent that had turned into ruins, a sword with an ancient aura flew over. The sword was not out of its scabbard, but it already gave people an extremely strong pressure. Pure karma beginning. Far away, Mu Qingshua's expression changed as he said in shock. Fan Lingyue slowly pulled out the ancient sword from the scabbard. Immediately the weather changed. An ancient aura appeared, shocking the world. Chapter 179. The night wind blew and her blue dress danced in the wind. Fan Lingyue held the hilt of the Jingye Absolute Beginning sword and slowly pulled it out. Seeing that the unknown ancient sword was about to be unsheathed, Ning Chen's feet moved, and he instantly closed in. The black sword pierced forward, threatening to kill. Clang! With a vibration, Fan Lingyue turned her hand and condensed her chi. White light gathered and blocked the black sword. The Absolute Beginning sword was unsheathed, and appeared for the first time in 1,000 years. Immediately, endless sword might spread and sent the figure in front flying. After 10 feet, Ning Chen landed on the ground and stopped in a sorry state. He looked at the ancient sword in Fan Lingyue's hand with a serious expression. This sword had been nurtured for an unknown number of years. The sword intent hidden inside was truly shocking. However, the most terrifying thing was the power of the sword itself. Even he, who had an undying body, felt a bone-chilling coldness. Tonight, knowing your destiny but not your destiny, returning to the Yellow Springs. With the sword in her hand, Fan Lingyue's entire temperament changed. The wise and calm military advisor disappeared, and was replaced by a death god full of killing intent. White light protected her entire body, and nothing could break it. With the Jingye Absolute Beginning in her hand, there was nothing she couldn't overcome. Facing the strongest opponent in his life, Ning Chen's expression was unprecedentedly serious. He took a step forward, and the cold snow around him surged. In that instant, the swords crossed each other. One was strong, and the other was even stronger. Under this bloody night sky, Another martial art was unleashed. At this moment, the military advisor of Bei Meng displayed not only the wisdom of the world, but also the strength that shocked the world. Ning Chen fought bitterly, and the injuries on his body became more and more serious. His undying body actually showed signs of collapsing. In the distant night sky, the light in Mu Qingshua's eyes kept jumping. No one knew the origin of the Jingye absolute beginning. However, this sword could purify some negative karma and inauspiciousness. It had a strong restraining effect on Ning Chen's fake undying body. More and more blood flowed from the corner of Fan Lingyue's mouth. Forcefully exerting all of her strength undoubtedly put a huge burden on her body. Specks of blood floated on her blue dress, like scarlet flowers blooming in the blue sky. This was a stalemate. Apart from the two of them, no one knew whether Fan Lingyue's body couldn't take it or Ning Chen's undying body collapse first. The two of them had already unleashed their strength to the peak. Sword qi danced in the air, forming a vacuum that no one dared to approach. There was no doubt about Ning Chen's strength. If it wasn't for Lingyue, he could definitely be called the strongest person below the innate stage. However, Fan Lingyue's strength had already far exceeded the limits of the Heaven's Reach realm, powerful to the point of being hard to believe. Absolute suppression, there was no chance. Facing the absolute beginning and the pure white body protecting divine light, the faster Ning Chen's sword was, the faster his true power would be consumed, and the more injuries he would have. He couldn't break through the protective divine light, and couldn't defend against Jingye Taichu. In the past, even when Ning Chen faced the Buddha in the mortal world, he wasn't in such a sorry state. The night was getting darker, and the bright moon was moving westward. More and more people were watching the battle. Si Mingjian had been standing there for a long time, waiting for the moment to attack. Suddenly, the ink sword flashed past and broke through the white light for the first time. Fan Lingyue's left shoulder was injured, and he took 3 steps back. This sudden change not only stunned the surrounding northern Ming soldiers, but also Ning Chen himself. He didn't know what was going on. In the next moment, Ning Chen came back to his senses. The black sword condensed into frost, and went in another inch. Stand down. Fan Lingyue endured the pain in his left shoulder, and forcefully raised his martial arts, pushing the former away with a palm. Ning Chen flew a dozen steps back, and stabilized his body. He condensed his martial arts, and as the frost surged, his sword swept out and once again stabbed towards the flaw in the protective divine light. Foolish beyond compare. Fan Lingyue sneered, and the white light around his body shone brightly. The moment the ink sword was about to reach him, his delicate hand condensed qi, and blocked the front. The swift and fierce sword actually couldn't move an inch. Ning Chen was stunned. In that short moment, Jingye Taichu flashed past and blood spurted out. How can this be? Ning Chen staggered and retreated 7 or 8 steps. He vomited blood, and his face was full of disbelief. Are you surprised? Fan Lingyue walked over step by step and said coldly, You only have one chance of good luck. Unfortunately, you didn't grab it. Why? Ning Chen supported himself with his sword, and said with difficulty. He was very sure that the position just now was the flaw in the protective divine light. Why did it disappear for no reason? Someone will tell you in the netherworld. Fan Lingyue stopped, and the white light of Jingye Taichu in his hand flourished as he slashed down. At this moment, the 4 marked swords that had been waiting for an opportunity also condensed qi and rushed over. At the critical moment, Ning Chen forcefully raised his body, and pushed the life scroll to its peak. The first snow fell from the sky and danced in the wind. Emotions when it's almost snowing, snow in July drifts. In the blink of an eye, sword light bloomed in the wind and snow. Every snowflake carried an extremely swift and fierce sword intent. It was unavoidable and unblockable. The 4 marked swords in front of Feng Ji were affected by the wind and snow, and were immediately dyed with blood. Fan Lingyue's expression changed slightly. He waved his hand and white light filled the sky, scattering the incoming snowflakes. In that short moment, Ning Chen's feet moved, and he quickly retreated. Fan Lingyue was about to give chase when he suddenly staggered and vomited a mouthful of blood. The illness that he had suppressed for a long time erupted, and he could no longer suppress it. In the ghost's palanquin, Ningchen also vomited a mouthful of blood, his face pale. What a good Fan Lingyue. He was really invincible. What a miserable defeat. Mu Qingxue said indifferently. Huh. Ningchen closed his eyes tiredly. He had nothing to say about his defeat. He was completely suppressed and had no power to fight back. Did you find an opening? Mu Qingxue asked. No. Ningchen shook his head and said hoarsely. I originally found it, but it disappeared for some reason. Let me tell you something you don't know. Fan Lingyue has a chaos volume. Mu Qingxue thought for a moment and reminded him. Chaos volume. Ningchen opened his eyes, and a light flashed through them. Perhaps the problem with the chaos volume in the heavenly book came from this. Fan Lingyue was able to perfectly conceal his martial aura before. That should be the effect of the chaos volume. As for whether or not the strange scene today was due to the chaos volume, he wasn't too sure. That terrifying white light was both offensive and defensive. If one couldn't find an opening, it was practically an invincible battle technique. Ugh! Suddenly, Ningchen let out a pained groan. The evil aura around his body surged, and the underworld spring in his dantian released a powerful evil aura that quickly spread. After a long battle, and being exhausted, the underworld spring erupted, wanting to devour his entire dantian. The situation that Prince Yen had spoken of had finally appeared, but it came at such an inopportune time. Mu Qingxue frowned, and waited for Ningchen to speak. Once this life-saving opportunity was used up, she would have fulfilled her promise. Ningchen endured the pain in his dantian, and took out 2 golden pills. In an instant, Buddhist light dazzled and Buddhist chanting could be faintly heard. Heavenly Buddha pill? Mu Qingxue narrowed his eyes. Ningchen didn't use this life-saving opportunity. Instead, he swallowed the 2 pills and forcibly expelled the evil aura from his body. Buddhism and Buddhism were natural opposites. The evil aura and Buddhist energy violently collided within his body. The evil aura of the underworld spring was abnormally powerful. Although it was less than 1/10 of its original power, it won in terms of purity. The 2 heavenly Buddha pills were released at the same time, barely managing to resist the underworld spring's power. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ningchen forcefully circulated the remaining true qi in his body. The power of the 3 heavenly books and the Zhangsun bloodline's true qi erupted at the same time, forcing out the underworld spring. You really have a lot of things in your body, said Mu Qingxue calmly, as he glanced at the overbearing underworld spring. In order to live, I have to try many things. Ningchen waved his hand, and put away the underworld spring. He smiled tiredly. Was the ghost girl reliable or not? She didn't tell him that the underworld spring would have side effects. Fortunately, he could still distinguish between those who wanted to help him, and those who wanted to harm him. Otherwise, he would have definitely gone over and destroyed the stone room she was in. When the ghost palanquin returned to the underworld, it was already close to daybreak. Mu Qingxue looked at this strange place and walked around. So this was the legendary underworld. A few months wasn't a long time for a Xiantian. She would wait for him for a few months to take back the life scroll that belonged to Desolate City. As for the Earth and Heaven scrolls, they could be considered as interest. Northern Ming's camp was a mess after the battle. The place where the 2 had fought was now a wasteland. The only thing that could still be seen were the terrifying sword scars. Fan Lingyue sheathed his sword, and his powerful aura disappeared. Enduring his injuries, he ordered, Wuxia, you and General Bai Li immediately take 40,000 light cavalry to stop Marquis Bloodrope's army. Yes. The 2 generals accepted the order, and quickly left. Ing Xiaoyuan, Yuan Fei Kongping, informed the army to immediately set off at daybreak, continued Fan Lingyue. Yes. Another 3 generals walked out and accepted the order. The rest of you, go back and prepare yourselves, said Fan Lingyue. Yes. The remaining 5 generals bowed respectfully, and quickly returned to the camp. PFFF. After everyone left, Fan Lingyue once again spat out a mouthful of blood. He staggered and almost fell down. When they met again, he was even stronger than before. Now in Northern Ming's camp, except for her, no one was his opponent. In just a short year, the young man of the past had become a big threat today. In the netherworld underworld, Ning Chen's expression was also abnormally grave. He had already tried his best to delay, but he didn't know if Marquis blood-robed could grasp the opportunity. Fan Lingyue's strength was beyond expectations. In addition to the white light protecting his body, there was also the Moon Scroll's move. Every Heavenly Scroll's move had to be at the Xiantian level to cultivate. The Earth Scroll was like this, the Heaven Scroll was like this, and the Moon Scroll was no exception. However, Fan Lingyue's cultivation was undoubtedly still below the Xiantian level. At this time, there was no longer any need to hide. If Fan Lingyue was at the Xiantian level, he wouldn't have been able to return tonight. The Heavenly Scroll's move was truly terrifying. At that moment he couldn't move or resist. He was completely waiting for death. If not for his immortal body, that palm would have already killed him. However, there was one thing he could be sure of. Fan Lingyue could only use the Moon Scroll's move once in a short period of time. Otherwise, with the addition of the pure beginning that Mu Qingxue spoke of, even if he had an immortal body, he would still be deader than dead. Ning Chen closed his eyes and stood in the netherworld-underworld in contemplation. He couldn't find a flaw. It was truly a battle that made people despair. He still couldn't understand why the flaw in the white light had disappeared. Also, what other use did the Chaos Scroll have besides hiding one's aura? Also, was the disappearance of the flaw related to the Chaos Scroll? In the distance, Mu Qingxue looked at the silent figure in front of him. His eyes flashed. Did she really know him in the past? Chapter 180. In the Netherworld Kingdom, Ghost Woman's seclusion room was emitting ghost qi that was growing stronger by the day. It could be seen that Ghost Woman was not far from the Xiantian realm and could step into it at any time. If nothing unexpected happened, Ghost Woman would be the next person to step into the Xiantian realm. Originally, this person should have been Xia Zi. Unfortunately, he was shot down from the Xiantian realm by Ning Chen's arrow that night. In this world, there were countless geniuses, but there were still a few special people who looked down on the world, far surpassing them. Underworld Child, Ghost Woman, Xia Zi, God's Child, etc. The Netherworld Kingdom had been in decline for a long time. In this generation, only Underworld Child and Ghost Woman were still awake. Underworld Child was an anomaly in the Netherworld Kingdom. His temperament was hard to predict, so the only true successor of the Netherworld Kingdom was Ghost Woman. The ghost qi in the stone room continued to spread. Under the red veil, Ghost Woman's mouth was bleeding. The more anxious she was to break through to the Xiantian realm, the more difficult it was for her to take that crucial step. Within the Netherworld Kingdom, Mu Qingxue felt the powerful ghost qi. His figure flashed and he arrived outside the stone room. Just as he was about to approach, he saw the Zhiga sword move, and sword intent spread out. Mu Qingxue's expression turned cold. He immediately retreated 30 meters, and unsheathed the Chungying sword, blocking the sword intent. The Zhiga sword blocked and protected the stone room behind the sword. Even a Xiantian expert would find it difficult to take half a step forward. Mu Qingxue narrowed his eyes and turned to leave. At the entrance of the Netherworld Kingdom, Ning Chen stood quietly. Seeing Mu Qingxue walk over, he smiled and said, "What's wrong? Are you not used to it?" "The person in the stone room is in danger," Mu Qingxue said calmly. Ning Chen turned around with a surprised expression. Just as he was about to speak, he felt the chaotic aura in the depths of the Netherworld Kingdom. His expression changed, and he quickly disappeared. Mu Qingxue thought for a moment and followed him. Ning Chen appeared in front of the stone room. He didn't dare to delay, and immediately pushed open the door and charged in. The Zhiga sword was calm, and didn't have any reaction. Mu Qingxue's eyes flashed. He tried to take a step forward, but he felt the sword intent appear again. It was as heavy as a mountain, difficult to approach. The Great Xia Kingdom's legend. Mu Qingxue looked at the sword in front of the stone room, and praised in his heart. When Prince Yan and Ning Chun went to Desolation City together, they used this sword. Now, it seemed that Prince Yan's true strength was not inferior to any three-disaster realm expert. Inside the stone chamber, Ghost Girl's blood qi was surging. The chaotic aura spread out and filled the entire stone chamber. Ning Chun rushed in and activated the life scroll. His sword finger condensed into frost and pointed at the ghost girl's chi. His vast aura poured into the ghost girl's chi, suppressing the surging Jin chi in her body. Outside the stone room, Mu Qingxue waved his hand. The shadow-bearing sword was unsheathed. Holding it in his slender hand, he rushed forward. Clang! The Zhiga sword moved, and the sword intent spread out. The Chengying sword was only 3 feet away when it was shaken out. Mu Qingxue was not affected at all. He took a step in the air, turned around, and slashed out with his sword. With a kung sound, the two swords clashed for the first time. The Zhiga sword hummed softly, its sword intent flourishing, completely erupting. Bang! Mu Qingxue flew out. After landing on the ground, his figure flickered a few times before he charged forward again. His white robe fluttered, and he was as fast as a flash of light. With one sword strike he disappeared immediately. When he reappeared, the sword light had yet to fall, and he was gone again. The Zhiga sword was as immovable as a mountain. Its sword intent spread out in circles, blocking the intruder. At the same time, inside the stone chamber, Ningchen activated the life scroll with all his might. Amidst the wind and snow, all of his power was poured into the ghost girl's body. The ghost girl let out a long painful groan. Her red wedding dress shook. Suddenly, the red veil flew up, revealing a seductive face. In that instant, the ghost girl opened her eyes. Her eyes were filled with panic. She subconsciously sent out a palm strike, and with a bang, the person in front of her was shaken out. Ningchen did not react in time. Without any preparation, he flew out of the stone chamber and landed on the ground. He vomited a mouthful of blood. The stone chamber closed. The ghost girl came back to her senses for a moment, and then closed her consciousness again. Cough cough, Ningchen's Jin Qi was severely depleted. His Qi was exhausted, and he was hit by the ghost girl's full power palm strike. For a moment, even standing up was difficult for him. Mu Qingxue stopped. Looking at Ningchen in front of him, he frowned. He reached out to pick him up and left. If I killed you right now, wouldn't it be as easy as blowing off dust? Mu Qingxue indifferently asked. Taking advantage of someone's perilous state is not the conduct of a gentleman. Ningchen coughed up a mouthful of blood. Talking about a gentleman's conduct with a woman is incomparably stupid. Mu Qingxue sneered. Ningchen was startled. He felt that this sentence was somewhat familiar, as if someone had said something like this in the past. If you kill me right now, you won't be able to obtain the earth and heaven scrolls. It's not appropriate. Mu Qingxue thoughtfully nodded. That makes sense. Ningchen tiredly smiled. She was still the same as before, cold on the outside but warm on the inside. She was far from being as unreasonable as she seemed. In the north of the Grand Xia, the northern Ming army was rapidly moving south. They were doing everything they could to cross the North River before the western reinforcements arrived. The North River was the longest river in the north of the Grand Xia. However, there hadn't been much rain this year. So many parts of the river had already dried up. The Marquis of the blood-clad Marquis led 80,000 imperial guards to chase after them day and night. They were already very close to the northern Ming army. Half a day later, 40,000 cavalrymen blocked the path and blocked the advance of the imperial guards. The two armies fought from noon to sunset. Nearly half of the 40,000 cavalrymen were lost, and they blocked the Marquis of the blood-clad Marquis' army for half a day. The next morning, when the northern Ming army was about to cross the bridge, the Marquis of the blood-clad Marquis broke through the blockade and chased after them. Fan Lingyue immediately gave the order to send 1,000 cavalrymen and 10,000 soldiers to cover the rear. The army quickly crossed the bridge and headed south. The 20,000 cavalrymen left on the other side of the North River immediately changed their route and headed west to avoid the imperial guards. They were prepared to cross the river from another place. In the end, the western reinforcements were still a step too late. They weren't able to stop the northern Ming army before they crossed the river. However, although the northern Ming army crossed the river, their losses weren't small. Close to 20,000 cavalrymen died in battle. The 1,000 cavalrymen and 10,000 soldiers covering the rear also suffered heavy casualties. They were almost completely wiped out. On the Great Xia side, the Marquis of the blood-clad Marquis, and the 80,000 imperial guards came prepared. However, facing the charge of the northern Ming cavalry and the stubborn resistance of the soldiers covering the rear, they still suffered heavy casualties. 25,000 imperial guards died in battle and would forever remain on the North River. A day later, the North Ming army changed their route and took down Yangguan City at lightning speed. They rested for a while. Pretty much at the same time, the western reinforcements arrived. 100,000 troops arrived and rushed toward Yangguan City. The 55,000 imperial guards under the Marquis of the blood-clad Marquis also rushed toward Yangguan City. That night, Ningchen came out once more and came to the Marquis of the blood-clad Marquis camp to discuss the war matters. Yangguan City still had 60,000 iron cavalry, 70,000 infantry, and close to 10,000 heavy cavalry. However, the 20,000 iron cavalry on the other side of the North River would arrive soon. The situation was still not good for them. More importantly, the ones defending the city were the Northern Ming army. Although Yangguan City wasn't an iron city like Yingui City and Yang City, the price they had to pay to take it down was still not something they could bear. The Marquis of the blood-clad Marquis and Ningchen discussed for most of the night, but still couldn't come up with a good plan. Fan Lingyue's decisiveness was indeed extraordinary. He was able to quickly change the situation and regain the initiative in such a disadvantageous situation. Especially the 20,000 northern Ming cavalrymen who were left outside. The number was neither more nor less, but it was like a thorn in their throat. It made them very uncomfortable and could become the key to the victory at any time. How long until Jingwu Duke's army arrives? Ningchen asked solemnly. 4 days, the Marquis of the blood-clad Marquis replied. Ningchen pondered. 4 days was not a long time. He hoped that there wouldn't be any accidents. Before dawn, Ningchen left and returned to the underworld. In the underworld, Mu Qingxue was still competing with the Zhiga sword in front of the stone room. They had been fighting for a whole night, and there was no sign of stopping. Ningchen had something on his mind. He stood aside absent-mindedly and kept thinking about the war between the two armies. This time, they made the Northern Ming suffer because they were unprepared. However, the Northern Ming army still crossed the river. It was a bit difficult to deal with them. On the other side of the North River, the remaining 20,000 cavalrymen were like a ticking time bomb. They were too dangerous and needed to be eliminated quickly. However, since ancient times, the light cavalry was the most mobile soldier type in the cold weapons era. To eliminate them was not easy. In the past, China was harassed by the nomads in the north. In China's history, the Yuan dynasty, which had the most land, was taken down by the Mongol cavalrymen using their scimitars and bows. The combat strength of the northern Ming imperial court's light cavalry was not any weaker than the Mongol cavalry of that time. In terms of military discipline, their combat quality was rarely seen since ancient times. Furthermore, this was a world where martial arts experts existed. With the cover of the Beiming light cavalry and martial arts experts, they were invincible. Apart from the Great Xia Guard's Legion Corps, it would be hard for any other army to block them. Ningchen thought for a long time, but could not find a solution. He helplessly looked at Mu Qingxue, who was still competing with the Zhiga sword, and said, Miss Mu, I have a question for you. Speak. Mu Qingxue's body flashed, and his sword stabbed at the tip of the Zhiga sword. With a pung, the earth on the Zhiga sword exploded, and a dark yellow light rose up. In the surrounding space, the gravity suddenly increased. Mu Qingxue only felt the Chengying sword in his hand sink, and before he could react, he was once again sent flying by the sword intent. Why don't you listen to me first? Anyways, there are still a few months, and you have plenty of time to compete with this sword. Ningchen seriously suggested. Mu Qingxue sheathed his sword and said expressionlessly, Speak. If you act, how confident are you in killing Fan Lingyue? Ningchen asked curiously. Mu Qingxue looked at the former with a weird expression, and a look of disdain flashed across his eyes. 50%. However, if this is your request, I advise you to give up. I only promised to save you once, and I did not promise to help you kill someone. Kiki, I'm just asking out of curiosity. Ning Chen rubbed his nose and laughed. A 50% chance was not high. Ning Chen's mind spun, and he temporarily suppressed this thought. If even Mu Qingxue only had a 50% chance, then that meant that as long as it was not a 3-disaster expert, no one would have the confidence to kill Fan Lingyue. This war had already reached the most crucial moment, and if he could kill Fan Lingyue, that would be the best solution. However, he could not place all his hopes on that. At this moment, he had to think of a way to prevent the northern Ming forces from gathering outside Yangguan City. If Jingwu Duke could arrive in time, Great Xia could still fight this war. Chapter 181. The cruelty of war was becoming more and more apparent these days. Every order of the decision-makers would decide the life and death of tens of thousands of soldiers and commoners. One wrong step, and millions of lives would be buried with them. Fan Lingyue's ruthlessness was not only reflected in his treatment of his enemies, but also in his treatment of his subordinates. As long as it was beneficial to the war, no matter who it was, no matter how many people he had, he would give them up. But no one could deny that it was precisely because of this ruthlessness that Beimeng had been able to fight their way into the heart of Grand Xia, with less than a third of their casualties. At the same time, the hands of the decision-makers of Grand Xia were also stained with blood, bearing enormous pressure. Every martial Marquis of Grand Xia was a shocking genius, but in the past thousands of years, there were only a few who could break through to the Xiantian realm. The reason was actually very simple. The martial marquises of Grand Xia bore too many sins. Wanting to break through to the Xiantian realm was thousands of times more difficult than ordinary people. Almost no one could do it. Even Grand Xia's war god had to borrow the power of the treasure below the imperial palace to break through this unbreakable barrier and enter the Xiantian realm. The remaining 9 martial marquises of Grand Xia all stopped at the peak of the 9th grade, or half-step Xiantian realm. On this day, a special person came to Yangguan City. His aura was powerful, and he was the only martial Marquis of Grand Xia in the past 1,000 years, the Beiwu Marquis. Xiao Wanhua greets the military advisor. The Beiwu Marquis, who was also the current Marquis of Northern Meng, bowed respectfully. Marquis Xiao, there's no need to be so polite. Fan Lingyue took a few steps forward, looking at the Grand Xia army rushing over. His eyes flashed. This battle would determine the future of Beimeng and Grand Xia. In the Netherworld Kingdom, Ning Chen stood at the entrance, feeling inexplicably uneasy. Now that the war had reached a critical moment, he was completely helpless. Time passed bit by bit. From dawn to noon, and from noon to evening, this short day seemed so long. After waiting for a long time, night finally arrived. Grand Xia's 100,000 reinforcements had arrived half a day earlier than expected. Marquis blood-robed, and the 55,000 imperial guards were not far from Yangguan City. If nothing unexpected happened, they would arrive before dawn. Jingwu Duke's army was also marching rapidly. As long as the Marquis of blood-robed and 100,000 reinforcements could delay them for 3 days, they would be able to arrive in time. After a series of battles, Northern Ming needed to rest. The 2 days in Yangguan City would be the best time to rest. 2 days ago, the Northern Ming army took down Yangguan City, which was indeed a little unexpected. However, the Northern Ming army's strongest point was their cavalry and archery. Once they stopped, their power would be greatly reduced. Everyone knew that the Northern Ming army would not stay in Yangguan City for too long. However, no one knew when they would leave the city. Fan Lingyue's thoughts were always hard to guard against and hard to guess. How is it? Have you found it? On the city gate tower, Fan Lingyue coldly asked. Military advisor, according to our spies, Jiming Marquis of the Great Xia always appears outside the fog forest. A black-clothed figure with golden embroidery on his sleeves respectfully knelt on the ground and replied. Very good, act according to the plan, Fan Lingyue ordered. Yes. The black-clothed figure accepted the order and quickly disappeared. Night fell. On the road from the fog forest to Yang City, the ghost palanquin quickly went north, hurrying towards Marquis Bloodclad's camp. In the underworld, Mu Qingxue was still resisting the Zhiga sword, and did not follow along. Neither of them expected that something would happen tonight. Ning Chen did not say anything, and Mu Qingxue naturally would not take the initiative to follow. When the ghost palanquin was 700 miles out of the fog forest, a majestic palm energy suddenly pressed down like a mountain. Ning Chen stepped out from the palanquin and met it with a backhand palm. With a loud bang, the mountain rocks were sent flying, and sand and dust filled the air. Today, under Tianhua Mountain, Jiming will be buried. As the voice spoke, a figure wearing a stone-green battle suit walked over. He looked mighty and majestic, and his aura was extraordinary. You are? Ning Chen's eyes flashed with shock. Northern Marshal Marquis. It was an unfamiliar face, but a familiar battle suit. This was a battle suit unique to the Marquis of the Great Xia, and it could not be faked. After a moment of shock, a strong sense of uneasiness rose in Ning Chen's heart. His feet moved, and he recklessly rushed forward. There was a change in the battle. Kill. At Xiao Wanhua's command, Feng, Yu Lei and Dian, for peak rank 9 personal guards walked out. The light of their swords and sabers flashed, pressing down on Ning Chen. Ning Chen was concerned about the battle ahead. His sword finger furiously slashed, and with a clang, the saber light in front of him was pushed away. However, after the saber light, 3 rays of sword chi followed, blocking the path ahead. Ning Chen's eyes turned cold. He unsheathed his black sword, and the sword light was sharp, scattering the 3 rays of sword chi. Feng Yu and Lei rushed forward. The 3 swords cooperated, attacking and defending each other. One sword was light, one was long, and one was heavy. Their teamwork was perfect. The remaining person raised his saber and formed a strange seal with his hands. Suddenly lightning fell from the sky. Using the saber as a guide, the furious lightning struck down on Ning Chen, who was trapped by the 3 swords. In an instant, the surrounding 10 feet turned into a sea of lightning. Yu and Lei were not affected at all. Only Ning Chen, who was amidst the lightning and thunder, felt a strong sense of threat, and his expression changed. Drifting snow of July. When it was almost snowing, the snow fell from the sky. A waterfall of sword light cut through the sea of lightning. The moment the 3 swords were blocked, a white figure flashed past. In the blink of an eye, she appeared outside the battle. With a slash of her sword, she sent Lei and Lei flying. The 3 swords reacted quickly. Their figures flashed and surrounded Ning Chen again. Their swords were even faster, more continuous, and more heavy, forcing Ning Chen to face them with full attention. The black sword faced the 3 swords. Although Ning Chen used his foundation and techniques to suppress them, it would be difficult for him to escape in a short time. Jian Luiying, what are you waiting for? Siga Jian walked out in the dark night and said lightly, when I attack, it's not up to you to tell me. Jian Luiying appeared and said coldly. Siga Jian didn't say anything more. With his 2 swords in hand, his figure flashed, and he joined Zhan Huan. Another strong warrior entered the battle. Ning Chen immediately felt the pressure increase. The blue light around him shone brightly. A palm that reached the sky shook the world. Waves shocking heaven and earth unite. Shocking waves of anger roared and surged. The 3 guards and 3 swords joined hands to block the heavenly might. On the other side, Siga Jian's 2 swords came together. Raising his martial arts, he also blocked the power of the ultimate move. At this moment, the light of the knife attracted lightning. Lei Wei seized the opportunity and chopped down with his knife. Thousands of birds cried out. Ning Chen took half a step back. A dark yellow light rose from his sword. As he waved his sword, the earth flipped. A large piece of broken rock flew up and blocked the sea of lightning. After the shock, Ning Chen took another step back. His expression was still fearless. The light on the black sword changed. Frost condensed into the body of the sword and swept out. 5 people taking turns to fight. It was rare to see someone at the peak of the 9th level. It made this battle reach its peak. The sounds of battle rang out endlessly. Sweat and blood flew everywhere. The brave figures with 1 sword in hand were as immovable as a mountain. Ming Jian couldn't hide the shock in his heart. Only by facing it personally could he feel the strength of his opponent. Who would have thought that the young man who had once been running for his life would have become such a terrifying warrior? In the past, he had doubted the military advisor for making a mountain out of a molehill. Only now did he know how stupid he had been. Everyone's thoughts spun under the light of the swords. Regardless of whether they regretted it or not, today's battle would end all past grievances. Two swords reflect the moon, 1,000 li of blood light. Siga Jian's move was extremely powerful. As his two swords moved, a blood moon rose behind him. A valiant pressure attacked, shocking one's soul. The three swords understood tacitly and attacked at the same time. Combined with the power of the lightning guard's knife light, they chopped down. Waves of the world flow to the east. Ning Chen's hands and swords moved together. After one sword chopped down, he flipped his palm and sent out another valiant palm. One sword leaves a shadow. Not far away, Jian Luiying, who had been waiting for an opportunity, drew his sword across the air and stabbed toward Su Yi. Ning Chen felt a strong sense of danger behind him. The scroll of the earth moved again. A large rock flew up and blocked behind him. However, under the cold front, the large rock was as weak as tofu. The sword light pierced through the barrier and arrived in the blink of an eye. The cold front entered his body, bringing with it a fountain of blood. Ning Chen bore the pain in his chest and punched out, sending the sword light flying. He could not stop for even a moment. The battle between the six of them arrived in an instant, not giving him any chance. After Jian Luiying entered the battle, Ning Chen was at a disadvantage for the first time. The true qi in his body was quickly used up. Even if the foundations from the scroll of life were unparalleled, he was still at a disadvantage in this endless stream of sword light. Outside the battlefield, Xiao Wanhua stood quietly, a pair of cold eyes quietly watching the battle. The Jingya Absolute beginning in front of him was ready to attack at any moment to end this battle. At the same time, outside of Yangguan City, a group of Great Xia soldiers appeared, waving the flag of the Marquis of Bloodrobe. The 100,000 Great Xia reinforcements general, Shi Hua, was slightly surprised when he heard the report. Weren't the Marquis of Bloodrobe's troops still a few hours away? While Shi Hua was thinking, the city gates of Yangguan City opened. The Beimeng heavy cavalry charged out in a black mass. Set up the formation, welcome the enemy. Shi Hua made a decision, not thinking too much and immediately giving the order. The 100,000 troops waited solemnly. The long axe unit, the shield unit, and the archer unit lined up in order, ready to welcome the enemy. After giving the order, Shi Hua still felt a little uneasy, so he sent out scouts to investigate the situation behind them. The darkness of the night hid too much of the truth. The speed of the troops that suddenly appeared was shockingly quick. Before the scouts could send news back, they had already arrived behind the Great Xia reinforcements. Kill! The 9,000 death warriors that descended from the heavens swiftly charged into the Great Xia camp. Before the Great Xia soldiers could react, they had already suffered heavy casualties. The same clothes, the same weapons. Only when the sword light slashed across did they know that the people in front of them were not the brothers that they had gone through life and death with. No one knew where these people came from. The 20,000 cavalry at the North River had just crossed the river. Yangguan City had been really quiet these 2 days, and no suspicious people walked out. Pretty much everyone had forgotten that Great Xia once had a martial Marquis who betrayed them. He was once an extremely high official, and he secretly developed 9,000 men of sacrifice for today. Below Tianhua Mountain, in front of Yangguan City, Great Xia and Ning Chen were both in an irreversible crisis. Chapter 182. The 9,000 death warriors were all extraordinary experts. Normally, they wouldn't be able to withstand the pressure of an army, but tonight, they played an unimaginable role. The Great Xia's formation was soon filled with flaws. A moment later, the northern Meng heavy cavalry swept over like a flood, rushing into the Great Xia's camp and forcefully opening a gap. Behind the 40,000 light cavalry, another 20,000 light cavalry appeared from the east and west city gates, flanking the two sides and swiftly forming a formation. Working together, they continuously reaped the lives of the Great Xia soldiers. When a war became a one-sided slaughter, the battlefield became a terrifying hell. Before General Shi Hua could give the order, He was surrounded by two figures. Sword intent surged from their bodies, and the moment they appeared, the surrounding soldiers were turned into blood and bones. The two newcomers were Sword 1 and Sword 2 from Sword City. Sword City had 3 disciples, Sword 1, Sword 2 and Sword 3. Only Sword 3 gave himself a new name, Jian Luiying. Sword 1 and Sword 2. Ever since they entered Desolate City, they didn't use any other names. Beside General Shihua, 1,000 guards risked their lives to protect him, but they still couldn't stop the two from advancing. Wherever the sword intent passed, blood blossomed. White and purple, they were so dazzling in the dark night. Every step the two Desolate City swordsmen took, large snowflakes would fly into the air unstoppable. 3 late-stage 9th grade guards went forward, but it was futile. The 3 of them were only able to block for 3 breaths of time, and their heads were separated from their bodies, dyeing the ground red with blood. Half an hour later, the general was dead, and the two left, no longer caring about him. Close to 10,000 heavy cavalry once again revealed their invincible sharpness, like a sharp knife, completely piercing the heart of the Great Xia's camp. The 100,000 Great Xia soldiers were continuously devoured by the northern Ming cavalry. After the general, the other generals in the army also fell one after another. No more orders were given, and there was only fear and panic. The difference between the two armies was already obvious. But under this night's surprise attack, there was no longer any suspense about the outcome. If the 100,000-strong army was prepared, even the strong northern Ming cavalry would have to pay a heavy price. However, tonight only a bloody massacre was left. On Yangguan City, Fan Lingyue stood quietly, her blue dress fluttering in the wind. Her beautiful face was calm and emotionless. This war was getting harder and harder. Not only Great Xia, but even the northern Ming soldiers were showing signs of fatigue. Only by winning could they continue to raise the morale of the soldiers. She didn't have much time left, but Great Xia didn't have much time left either. The battle below was basically a foregone conclusion. Fan Lingyue turned her gaze in the direction of Mount Tianhua in the south. Compared to the outcome of this battle, she was more concerned about the situation there. If Ningchen died, there would be no more variables in this war between the two dynasties. With Xiao Ho and Jingye Taichu, she was 99% sure that Ningchen would not be able to leave Mount Tianhua. As for the remaining sliver of possibility, whether it existed or not, no one could control it. Time passed bit by bit. The sounds of battle grew more and more brutal. Blood dyed the ground red. Under the moonlight it was like hell on earth. There was no suspense about Great Xia's defeat. On northern Ming's side, the 9,000 death warriors that Xiao Wanhua had left behind had all died. After completing their mission, they left with pride and satisfaction. At the foot of Mount Tianhua, Xiao Wanhua seemed to have sensed something. He looked toward the north, giving the 9,000 death warriors a final farewell. In this world there was no right or wrong. Everyone had their own master. Only the victor had the right to write history. After a moment of sadness, Xiao Wanhua turned his gaze back to the battle. Great Xia's Jiming Marquis was a new martial marquis who had risen after he left. He had inherited Great Xia's martial marquis and was as powerful as ever. He was an expert worthy of respect. The military advisor had specially arranged for today's encirclement. Facing such a powerful lineup, the fact that Jiming Marquis could last until now was truly beyond his expectations. 6 experts of the present age, each of them an elite of the heavens reach realm. If it was a normal day, it would be impossible for them to join hands to deal with one person. Today, only the military advisor had the ability and authority to do so. Only the person on the other side had the qualifications. Sword rained swift. The sword in the Yue's hand turned into a winding sword move. It was like a winding drizzle, making it difficult to break free. Sword thunder slash. The Lei Wei wielded a heavy sword with astonishing power. Every sword fell. A loud sound shook the sky, like a giant thunder. Sword wind sweep. In the wind guard's hand, a thin sword was as fast as the autumn wind. In the blink of an eye, several sword lights had flashed past. The 3 guards joined hands. Their tacit understanding was unparalleled. They had both offense and defense. Coupled with the lightning guard's special technique, there were no flaws. The battle was getting more and more intense. Ning Chen activated the Earth Scroll, and a huge rock flew over, blocking the Rain Guard's figure. Immediately, the ink sword condensed into frost, and a sword forced the Lei Wei back. However, before he could even take a breath, he saw the sword wind sweeping over, stabbing toward his throat. First defense, raging waves splitting 10,000 miles. The light around Ning Chen changed again. His left hand's sword finger drew in the air, and a raging wave sword appeared, splitting the sky. It was the might of heaven. The wind guard was sent flying, his mouth red. Sword flowing light. The three guards retreated, and Jian Luiying came in front of him. A sword of flowing light broke toward Ning Chen's dantian. At the same time, the four engraved swords slashed out two sword chi, sealing all of the latter's escape routes. Bang! Ning Chen blocked Jian Luiying's cold blade with his sword. However, he no longer had the time to deal with the two sword chi behind him. With a bang, blood sprayed out. Swift thunder and lightning. The lightning guard used his special technique again, summoning lightning. Wherever the blade pointed, thunder roared and lightning flashed, falling violently. Ning Chen was furious. His whole body rose rapidly, and in the fierce wind and snow, he used the Taoist secret technique of the past. When snow is fast, 3,000 miles of sword snow. The sword pierced the ground and the wind and snow scattered. A vast aura erupted, like thousands of ice swords exploding, shaking the heavens and earth. Ugh! The 6 people surrounding Ning Chen were affected by this terrifying aura. They retreated dozens of feet, and after pausing they vomited blood. As they breathed heavily, sweat dripped down from their bodies. Even though the sky was covered in snow, Ning Chen was still sweating all over. The battle had consumed a lot of energy. At this moment, Xiao Wanhua, who was watching from the side, finally moved. With a shake of his hand, Jingye Taichu flew up. The moment he pulled out his sword, he arrived in front of Ning Chen. Ning Chen suddenly felt danger behind him, and turned to block the sword. However, he had already lost the initiative. Adding on the fact that he was exhausted, he immediately fell into a disadvantage. To be able to last until now in the face of 6 strong people, Jiming Marquis, you are worthy of this. Marquis taking action. Xiao Wanhua's Jingye Taichu was as fast as lightning. In the blink of an eye, the sword light was pressing down. Its powerful aura was actually infinitely close to the Xiantian realm. Among the 10 martial marquises of the Grand Xia, the Beiwu Marquis martial strength had always been in the middle. Now it seemed that he had been hiding his strength. His sword was as heavy as a mountain, and his deep foundation was rare in the world. Ning Chen blocked several of the former's moves. His aura was unstable, and a sword slashed past, staining his body with blood. Jian Luiying, the 4 engraved swords, and the 4 guards immediately rushed forward. Their swords and sabers slashed downwards. Snowfall of the 7th month. Ning Chen forced himself to raise his cultivation. With a wave of his sword, snow fell. The wind and snow fell, and the sword and tent scattered in all directions. The 6 blocked the falling snow and retreated several steps, their blood boiling. Let's go! Ning Chen took advantage of this slight gap, and quickly left the area. Chase, said Xiao Wanhua coldly. The 4 engraved swords, Jian Luiying, and the 4 guards quickly followed, chasing in the direction Ning Chen had left. At the foot of Tianhua Mountain, a white figure flitted past. However, before he could go 3 miles, he saw several figures blocking his path. Saber light and sword shadows pressed forward. Each one of them had a cultivation of 4th rank or higher. Their battle cries shook the heavens. With his path blocked, Ning Chen's black sword danced. With a slash of his sword, blood flew everywhere. There was no path of retreat, no choice. Around Ning Chen, severed limbs and heads flew into the air. Only by killing could they find a way to survive in this situation where they were sure to die. Blood splattered all over the sky. No one knew whose blood it was. There was a limit to one's strength. Faced with the endless attacks, they gradually slowed down. At this time, Jian Luiying and the others caught up. They didn't stop for a moment, immediately rushing forward. Sword shadows swirled in the air, chasing after his soul. Ning Chen blocked 2 swords, but couldn't block the 3rd one. With a bang, he retreated 10 steps and vomited blood. More and more blood flowed out. His strength also gradually disappeared. Although he had an undying body, he gradually showed signs of exhaustion. Jiming Marquis, you won't be able to escape tonight. Xiao Wanhua held Jingye absolute beginning and walked over step by step. His powerful pressure scattered all the obstacles around him. The absolute beginning sword was extremely powerful. When the black sword touched it, it constantly trembled. Ning Chun, who was already at the end of his rope, was constantly injured. Finally he reached his limit. 6 strong cultivators of the current era, plus Xiao Wanhua, who held Jingye absolute beginning, were an invincible combination. Fan Lingyue didn't leave any flaws for tonight's attack. He wanted to kill Ning Chun at all costs. Love when it's about to snow, Isa. In the face of no way out, Ning Chun refused to give up. His sword moved, wanting to use another Taoist secret technique. Suddenly, his qi and blood stagnated and he vomited blood. He couldn't use his true essence. At this moment 4 swords flew over. Immediately, blood dyed his clothes red. In a tight battle, there was no room for accidents. Ning Chun's chest had a shocking sword wound. Blood flowed out. It was abnormally glaring. Outside the 7 people, endless soldiers surrounded them. They were all experts specially selected from the army. They had been preparing for this battle for a long time. Ning Chun stood up and looked at Mount Tianhua beside him. Could it be that his path had ended here? He knew that this day would come sooner or later. He wasn't afraid of death. Unfortunately, it was a few months too early. In the next moment, the underworld source flew out and exploded. Ning Chun used the life scroll and forcibly absorbed the power of the underworld source. Immediately, an incomparably powerful evil qi surged and quickly spread between heaven and earth. With the underworld source as a guide, the spiritual qi of heaven and earth surged at the same time. A power that didn't belong to the Hotian realm appeared. With Ning Chun as the center, it quickly spread out. Mount Tianhua trembled. The ground cracked and the mountains shook. Large rocks rolled down, and huge gullies appeared on the ground. The terrifying power was extremely shocking. The forbidden technique of the life scroll that he had cultivated for a long time would appear today. It was the only technique in the world that no one had seen before, because no one had cultivated it. Ning Chun also didn't manage to cultivate it. However, at the last moment, even if he only had an incomplete technique, even if he had to risk everything, he would still make everyone here die with him. Mr. Jianyi, if possible, I hope you can go and take a look. Fan Lingyue turned around and said politely to a man in white behind him. Okay. Jianyi nodded. His figure flashed, transforming into a sword beam that disappeared into the night. What are you worried about? Jianair asked with a warm smile. He is different from the others. If he doesn't die, it will be very difficult for me, Fan Lingyue replied. I heard that military counselor and this Marquis of Jiming were once friends. Sword 2 asked curiously. Mr. Jianair also said that it was in the past. Now that our standpoints are different, we are only enemies, Fan Lingyue said calmly. Making an enemy out of the military advisor is truly a terrifying thing. Jianair smiled. Beimeng and Desolate City will always be friends, said Fan Lingyue. I think so too. Jianair took a step forward and said softly. At the foot of Tianhua Mountain, it was a hell of ice and snow. Ning Chun's body was surrounded by a bloody mist. The bloody pillar of heaven continued to spread in the bloody wind and snow, causing the surrounding world to shake even more violently. Xiao Wanhua, Jian Luiying, and the others were all rare experts in the world. Naturally, they could see that Jiming Marquis was risking his life and had not truly stepped into the Xiantian realm. Retreat quickly. The 7 of them retreated again and again, temporarily avoiding the sharp edge. No one wanted to be buried together with Jiming Marquis at the last moment. In the blood pillar, Ning Chun's consciousness gradually blurred. Only his instinctive fighting spirit supported his final move. The wind and snow fell like a waterfall dyed with blood. The power of the forbidden move became more and more terrifying. Heaven and earth were out of balance. The earth was broken, and the mountains were shaken. In the awe-inspiring divine power, a beautiful figure in white suddenly appeared. Strange patterns condensed in the void. She stepped into the blood pillar and with a bang, a palm imprinted on Ning Chen's dantian, forcibly interrupting the forbidden move. In the next moment, Mu Qingxue grabbed Ning Chen and moved his feet, about to leave. Mu Qingxue, you dash! Jian Luing was startled and immediately became furious. He slashed out with his sword, blocking Mu Qingxue's path. Get out of the way! Mu Qingxue used the Chengying sword to block Lung Feng's attack. Let him go! Jian Luing raged. I can't! Mu Qingxue's true qi shook, pushing Jian Luing away. His figure flashed and disappeared. The speed of the Chengying sword was unparalleled in the world. If Mu Qingxue wanted to leave, no one could stop him. The 7 of them could only watch as he left. Damn it! Jian Luing's expression was gloomy, as he looked in the direction the 2 of them had left. Jian Luing, I hope Desolate City can give the military advisor a satisfactory explanation for tonight's matter, said Xiao Wanhua coldly. Humph. Jian Luing coldly snorted and did not reply. The battle had ended, and the foot of Tianhua Mountain was a mess. Jiming Marquis had been rescued, so Xiao Wanhua could only order his troops to return and report back. Of the 1,000 soldiers he had brought, not many were left. They had either died at Ning Chen's hands, or had been caught up in the upheaval. Less than a third of them had survived. The survivors quickly buried the dead. Just as they were about to leave, they saw an azure-robed figure walk over under the moonlight. In the blink of an eye, he was 30 meters away. A beautiful young lady followed behind Qing Yi. She carried an ancient sword rack on her back, and on the rack, there were 3 swords. Prince Yan. Xiao Wanhua's expression immediately changed. The 7 of them and the hundreds of soldiers behind them all acted as if they were facing a great enemy. After the battle in the west, everyone knew that the current legend of the Grand Xia was at least a peerless expert on the same level as a martial lord. Prince Yan's gaze passed through the 7 of them. Looking at the bloodstained snow, his expression gradually turned cold. Behind him, Wild was biting her lip, tears flickering in her eyes. She could feel that those were his blood. If you don't die with one sword, this matter will end, said Prince Yan. The 7 of them all had unsightly expressions. How many people in the world could block a legendary sword strike? Senior, can you add Jian Yi to this sword strike? At this moment, a white-robed figure rushed over and stood in front of the 7 of them. Yes, nodded Prince Yan. Jian Yi expressed his gratitude and immediately raised his aura to the peak. He turned into a sword and fought against Jian Yi with his sword. There was no way out. Xiao Wanhua, Jian Luing, and the others had no choice but to focus on facing this sword strike. Wild, said Prince Yan softly. Wild nodded unwillingly. She put down her sword stand and stood to the side. With a clang, the red sword came out of its sheath. Prince Yan waved his hand, and the red sword stabbed into the ground. His sword intent silently spread. Wild, let's go. Putting the red sword back into its sheath, Prince Yan brought Wild away. Uft. After the 2 of them left, the 7 of them vomited blood. Behind Jian Yi, his ancient sword broke. He sighed emotionally. So this was a legend. Now that they had met today, they had learned that there was a sword on a sword. He was very clear that Prince Yan hadn't wanted to kill them. That sword strike just now had only been at the peak of the 9th rank. But even so, the 8 of them had still been unable to receive it. In the past, when the legend had come to Desolate City, he hadn't recognized a sword on a sword. In this world, only his master could stand at the peak of the sword with this legend of the Grand Xia. There was no third person. Let's go, said Jian Yi calmly to Jian Luing. Yes, senior apprentice brother. Jian Luing, who hadn't backed down in the slightest when facing Mu Qingxue, nodded respectfully. Not long after the 2 swords left, Xiao Wanhua also left with the others. At the foot of Mount Tianhua, only blood and blood-red snow remained. The night wind blew, filling the sky. At the entrance of the underworld, 2 figures had been standing there for a long time. Prince Yan looked at Wild and asked, Wild, are you not going in? Wild was only a step away, but she hesitated. After a long time she softly asked, Will something happen to him? Prince Yan shook his head. He won't. Then I won't see him, said Wild gloomily. Why? Prince Yan's eyes flashed with a rare trace of confusion. "He won't let me see him like this," said Wild softly. Prince Yan sighed softly. In the past, Wild would never consider such things. "People have to grow up," said Wild with a forced smile. Prince Yan was silent for a moment, then nodded slightly. He turned and said, "Let's go. In this half a year, you will follow me and fulfill the promise he couldn't fulfill." "Okay." Wild nodded and followed. Yangguan City, inside and outside the city, was as bright as day. On the city tower, Fan Lingyue was still standing there, quietly waiting. She wasn't waiting for the result of the battle below, but for news from afar. Not long after, the two swords returned. Jian Luiying went forward and explained the situation in detail. Fan Lingyue didn't say anything, only quietly listening. Little junior sister actually intervened. "This is unexpected. Didn't you want to kill him before?" said Jin Er with a smile. "Little junior sister went to see Master a few days ago. Could it be Master's idea?" Jian Luiying couldn't help but ask. "No," Jianni replied. After that, she didn't say anything else, and didn't give any explanation. "Third brother, it seems like you've been with Master for too short a time. That's why you're asking such a boring question," said Jian Er with a smile as he looked at the distant east. Master went to look for Jianni. He didn't know how he was doing. However, in this world, there was no place that Master couldn't go, even if it was the chaotic fog sea at the end of the world. "Eldest senior brother, do you think that Jiming Marquis can survive?" asked Jian Er. "I don't know," answered Jianni simply. "No need to guess anymore. He won't die," said Fan Lingyue calmly at this moment. "How do you know?" asked Jian Luiying with a strange expression. "Because I haven't died yet. He will definitely do whatever it takes to survive," answered Fan Lingyue indifferently. Merciless words echoed in the night wind. The two people who knew each other the best were calculating each other's lives. Even if they didn't want to be born in the same year, they wanted to die together. Chapter 184. Living was a very difficult thing to do, but it was not an impossible thing. For example, Jiang Wangji and the teacher had paid a price that ordinary people couldn't bear in exchange for 1,000 years. Fan Lingyue was right. Ningchen hadn't died. He had managed to live on with difficulty. He hadn't used his forbidden technique, but his meridians had still been destroyed. His true qi had gathered in his sea of qi. Every time it passed through his damaged meridians, it was like 1,000,000 poisonous needles piercing his bones. The pain was unbearable. "If you don't want to die, bear with it," said Mu Qingxue coldly. Xiantian true qi poured in, forcibly passing through his damaged meridians and dispersing the purifying primordial sword qi from his wounds. "Ugh!" Ningchen let out a pained groan. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. After the forbidden technique's power dissipated, his skin turned black once more. Without meridians, true qi had forcibly passed through his body. This kind of pain was unimaginable. Ningchen didn't want to die, so he could only endure it. The purifying sin-beheading sword was too effective against Ningchen's illusory undying body. If he didn't dispel the remaining sword qi, even his undying body would quickly collapse. True qi surged around Mu Qingxue, continuously passing through his body and directly entering his body. Time slowly passed. Mu Qingxue's expression changed again and again. He couldn't understand how Ningchen had managed to last until today with his body. His organs were destroyed, his body was covered in poison, and even his meridians had been destroyed. An undying body wouldn't die, but that didn't mean it wouldn't feel anything. There was a limit to a person's endurance. Could he really overcome this kind of pain with willpower alone? Mu Qingxue was silent. He pushed the true qi in his right hand a little more, increasing the speed of dispersing. An hour later, the purifying sin-beheading sword qi within Ningchen's body was finally completely dispelled. His collapsing body gradually stabilized. "From today onwards, you can no longer use true qi," said Mu Qingxue calmly. Without meridians, true qi had nowhere to go. It could only pass through the body. No one could endure this kind of pain. Forcibly using martial arts or cultivating would only result in qi deviation due to distraction. Ningchen opened his eyes and smiled tiredly. "It doesn't matter. As long as I'm alive, I've already fulfilled my promise. From now on, I won't care about your life or death. Cherish the few days you have left." With that, Mu Qingxue turned around and walked towards the depths of the underworld. In the northern Ming royal court, the reinforcements were gathering day by day. After several months of preparation, the 200,000-strong army finally departed from northern Ming in a grandiose manner, passing through Swallow Return City and heading south. 70,000 iron cavalry and 130,000 infantrymen were a huge threat to the north of Great Xia. The two armies clashed for the first time, 300 li south of Yingui City. Bai Marquis and Xiang Marquis had been waiting for a long time. After 3 days of fighting, they temporarily stopped the northern Ming's reinforcements from moving south. The battle prowess of the northern Ming iron cavalry was obviously higher than that of the Great Xia army. However, the two martial marquises were veterans of the battlefield. 200,000 against 200,000. In a short period of time, it would be difficult to determine the victor. The place where the two armies were fighting was close to the border between the two dynasties. Reinforcements could arrive at any time. No one knew what the future would be like. Within the borders of the northern Ming royal court, soldiers were still being recruited. The people of the grassland loved to fight and were good at fighting. They could ride horses and shoot arrows since they were young. They were a true warrior race. Fan Lingyue's prestige in northern Ming was unparalleled. When the conscription order was sent out, the young men's reaction was not to resist, but to respond enthusiastically. On the contrary, the conscription order of the Great Xia Imperial Court was something that the people would resist no matter when. The people of Great Xia loved peace, but they lacked the courage that they should have. After the northern Ming reinforcements entered, the pressure on Great Xia increased. Now that Heaven's Gate was still under the control of northern Ming, Great Xia was still in a passive situation. South of Heaven's Gate, the northern Ming army led by Fan Lingyue was an unparalleled threat to Great Xia. Especially after the defeat of the reinforcements from the west, this threat had increased to an unprecedented level. There were only 4 camps of the Imperial Guards left in the Imperial City. If there were any changes, the consequences would be unimaginable. On the battlefield in the north, the real fighting power was only the 140,000 Imperial Guards under Marquis Blood-Robed and Duke Jingwu. The 20,000 cavalry outside of the northern Ming army crossed the river in advance and guarded the opposite bank. Using the natural barrier, they gave Duke Jingwu's army a lot of trouble. The order they received was to delay the footsteps of Duke Jingwu's army as much as possible. There was no need to fight to the death. Hence, after the two armies fought at the North River, the 20,000 cavalry left. In the next few days, the two armies clashed many times. Each time, the 20,000 cavalry left immediately. They mainly harassed the enemy and did not continue fighting. The northern Ming cavalry had the best movement ability in the world. Even the most elite imperial guards of Great Xia were inferior to them. On the other side, after the 100,000 reinforcements were defeated, the 50,000 imperial guards under Marquis Blood-Robed fell into a difficult situation. They could neither advance nor retreat. 2 days later, the northern Ming army left Yangguan City and went down south. The cities along the border sent out reinforcements, but it was just a drop in the bucket and did not have much of an effect. After the encirclement, the number of times Ning Chen appeared in the Great Xia camp decreased. Every time he left the fog forest, he would take a different path to cover his tracks. Ning Chen did not mention that night, and Marquis Bloodrobe did not know either. When Mu Qingxue was in the underworld, he kept trying to break through Zhige's sword intent. Although he failed every time, he persevered. Ning Chen silently wrote down the Heaven Scroll and gave it to Mu Qingxue as a thank you for helping him. Mu Qingxue did not refuse. He accepted the Heaven Scroll and continued with his unfinished business. Ning Chen could not cultivate. Every day, he was thinking about the war. He looked at the army map over and over again, seriously thinking about every possibility in the future. Facing Fan Lingyue, he and the Great Xia Empire had suffered too many losses. The successive defeats forced him to reconsider again and again. He did not expect Fan Lingyue's move at all. It had been too long since Marquis Beiwu's betrayal. Not only him, but probably no one in the world would think of this person. However, who would have thought that at this critical moment, the Beiwu Marquis, who had been forgotten by the world, would once again ruthlessly stab him and Great Xia. Fan Lingyue had hidden this move for too long, so long that everyone had forgotten about it. Only then did he take it out. In the next few days, Northern Ming's army continued south. The army was getting closer and closer to the royal capital. Within the borders of Great Xia, the atmosphere of panic was getting more and more serious. Correspondingly, all kinds of hidden dangers appeared again, causing chaos to the foundation of Great Xia. In the southeast of Great Xia, the major sects that had been suppressed by Great Xia for 1,000 years were getting more and more arrogant, no longer restraining themselves. In the past, the reputation of the one sect in one tower once again spread out, walking out into the open. The one sect referred to the sword sect, the one tower referred to the dangerous tower, and the two tower referred to the Wang clan of Donglin and the Yao clan of Yuqing respectively. The four major powers were not ranked first or last. If one were to talk about strength, the sword sect and the Wang clan of Donglin might be slightly stronger. Fan Lingyue quickly contacted the major sects and clans, stating that as long as the major sects could help Northern Ming conquer Great Xia, he would do his best to support the development of the major sects and clans. He would not restrict them like Great Xia. This promise moved the hearts of the major sections. In this land, they didn't care who was the emperor, but they needed a relaxed environment for development. For 1,000 years, Great Xia had been persistently suppressing the growth of the major sects and clans. The past facts had proven that the major sects were the true source of chaos. 10,000 years ago, the 3,000 major sects were prosperous, but it was also the era with the most conflicts and wars in the Divine Continent. In the face of Northern Ming's sincerity, among the two major sects and clans, the Wei Tower, whose reputation was the worst, was the calmest. As an organization formed by assassins, the Wei Tower was always the most difficult existence to come into contact with. The attitudes of the Sword Sect and the Yao clan of Yuqing were more ambiguous. They didn't agree or reject, continuing to observe. Only the Wang clan of Donglin directly agreed to Fan Lingyue's conditions. The Wang clan was a major clan that had existed for more than 1,000 years. This meant that the Wang clan had already existed before Great Xia existed. After 1,000 years, very few people in the world knew that the Wang clan of Donglin used to be the #1 clan of the Heshi dynasty. Just like the Zhongsung clan of today, the Wang clan of Donglin was loyal to the Heshi dynasty, at least 1,000 years ago. Duke Shiyu was from one of the branches of the Wang clan of Donglin. He had never forgotten the teachings of the ancestors to help the Heshi dynasty revive. Su Fian was the princess of the Heshi dynasty. That night, after escaping from the imperial city, she temporarily hid in the Wang clan. However, after Duke Shiyu's death, the Wang clan's attitude towards Su Fian became subtle. After all, in this world, no one was willing to work for others. Su Fian saw this in her eyes, but she still maintained her calm and wasn't affected at all. Human nature was like this. There was no need to mess up her heart for these people. If there was hatred, then the only person she hated was the Jiming Marquis of Great Xia. This hatred was irreconcilable. Hua Yuan, in the Peony Pavilion, Su Fian looked at the spring lightning zither on the stone table in front of her, her thoughts drifting away. Princess, have you considered the marriage alliance? Unknowingly, an elder of the Wang clan walked over with a smile on his face. His smile was gentle and seemed very benevolent. However, behind that smile there was a bone-piercing coldness. Su Fian smiled faintly. Elder Yi, isn't the Wang clan afraid that after I become the Empress of Northern Ming, I will take revenge on the Wang clan? Princess must be joking. The Wang clan needs the help of the Northern Ming dynasty to continue growing stronger. Princess also needs the Wang clan as a shield. This is a mutually beneficial relationship. With Princess's intelligence, how could you refuse? Elder Yi really is a good persuader. I agree, Sufyan slowly said. Your Highness is wise. Eldery bowed respectfully and retreated. Sufyan stood up and looked at the beautiful scenery around the peony pavilion. She sighed inside. Perhaps this was the last time she would be able to appreciate the scenery of the Central Plains. In the future, she would have to face the endless grasslands and deserts. For the hatred in her heart, she had to endure. The Northern Ming Dynasty's emperor was only 8 years old. She had plenty of time to prepare. She had already failed once, and she definitely wouldn't allow a second time. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.